begin day one of Broadcast Tech Fest, we're going to hear from Tania Alexander, Director of Factual Entertainment at Studio Lambert. Tania is responsible for unscripted shows, including the huge hits Undercover Boss and Gogglebox. Tania has exec produced Gogglebox since it launched in 2013 and is central to the creation, design, casting and production of the show, which is currently airing its 16th consecutive series, which is being made during lockdown conditions. Right, first of all, Tania, how are you? And
Fine.
How are you getting on with everything in lockdown?
We're okay. It's we are well versed now, I suppose, because we did series 16, which was the one before this. We suddenly had to switch in episode 5 and completely reconfigure to make sure everything was safe and possible for us to continue under lockdown restrictions. So I suppose going into the 16th series, we're a little bit more prepared.
So you're at episode 5, and I know it's an incredibly fast turnaround show anyway, and then you had to adapt obviously incredibly quickly. Perhaps what would be a good idea is to talk about what would have happened prior to lockdown as your sort of typical weekly workflow, because it is fascinating and it's actually quite scary when you listen to exactly how quickly you turn this stuff around. So could you give us a bit of an overview into how Gogglebox is made?
Yes, of course. So we have across every week, we have 25 filming slots. So that's divided up to configure 5 filming days with 5 crews out, filming 5 households every night. So we film all over the country. We go as far up as County Durham, as far across as Wiltshire and Bristol, and obviously London, and then down to the southeast coast. So we're reasonably everywhere, all over the country. We have the setup in the field is we have very small crews comprising camera, sound, producer and researcher. And pre-lockdown, we would have 2 cameras, 900 hotheads, they are 900, it's only 900 hotheads. And we would rig those in the houses. They'd sit side by side. One captures the wide, one captures the close-up by the TVs. We'd cable from those into a small room where the crews would set up a small gallery, which would record all the material from that night. We film about 6 hours each evening. After we finished filming, we would de-rig the gallery, de-rig the cameras, and we'd remove them. So that kit effectively stays with that crew across their 5 days. Right. So we have 2 cameras, and in total we use on Gogglebox 10 cameras and 10 record decks and the mics for each family. Now once that material is captured, we shoot on XD cam. Those discs are driven by a runner back to the edit suite in London, and then that material is ingested for us to work on. So we first receive material in the edit on the Saturday, and we have a smallish team on the Saturday initially going through the first batch of stuff. And we watch every single moment. So we do have logs, but they're primarily to tell you ins and outs of starts of watches, of archive. But we look at it's very important that we see every single frame. So we watch everything. That is very time consuming. Across both cameras, we can film sometimes up to 200 hours of material a week, but we have teams that go through that. They remove a lot of the rubbish and the producer's voice, prompt voice, and then we effectively end up with a timeline of the really good stuff. And then my very clever team at this stage then intercut all of the comments in a chronological order throughout that piece of drama or news piece or documentary, whatever they're watching. That is a craft in itself. And then those timelines are effectively taken by cutting suites, which I kind of are across for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And those timelines are then crafted into what you see go out on Friday. So on a Monday, I like to have at least 1 done, at least 3 minutes of the show cut.
Right.
So that's Monday. On Tuesday, I like to try and get 4 to 5 packages finished. And then when I say packages, that's anything from 3 minutes of the show to 5 minutes of the show.
Right.
On a Wednesday, our online editor comes in and needs to have a good, if you like, a good load of packages in the bin, in the pipeline for him to prep. He does an amazing job. It almost has a sound mix on it, Gogglebox, because he keyframes every single. So he will go through a piece of sync and he ups and downs the mics, and there's often sort of anything between 17 and 30 keyframes within a 6 second, if not shorter, piece of sync.
Wow.
It's beautiful. I can't do that, and he's amazing. He is the person totally responsible for making Gogglebox sound so fantastic. He grade it at the same time, and each package he goes through and then puts in his little graded and mixed bin ready for us to stitch on the Thursday. Wednesday is the big night, because if I've got 4 packages, maybe 4.5 done on the Tuesday, then we will need to finish and drop in families on the Wednesday and create new packages, because the show usually contains between 8 and 9 packages every week. Right. So there's still another 50% of the show to do in one day on that Wednesday. And as we finish a package and I sign it off, it then gets passed to the online editor, who does what I've just explained. And then we come in on a Thursday and we cut the pre-titles, and then we look at all the packages, go through them for time. It's pretty full on that Thursday. Get it stitched, decide what goes where, and literally pick a running order from paper, from just sort of what we think is the strongest packages to open, good into the part breaks, strong one to end with, and then it's packaged up. And used to have a Channel 4 viewing, which meant the commissioning editor and the legal representative used to come in. We'd all watch the 47 minutes together. We don't do that anymore, obviously. We send links, and then we wait for the feedback on that. And then once we get a sign off for a part, the online guy then literally starts prepping it seriously for broadcast, and then that tends to happen till late into Thursday, early Friday morning, and then we record the VO very early in the morning, and that gets laid in. Then there's a sound mix, and then it's laid back to tape just after lunch, and then it's uploaded and sent to Channel 4 via link about mid to late afternoon. So it's right to the wire pretty much.
I would imagine a pandemic probably hasn't helped things, and I know that you've had to make some adaptations, but I kind of presume those adaptations were done at the end of a series so that you had time to sort of bed them in properly. But it sounds from what you were saying earlier as if you made these quite enormous adaptations like incredibly quickly.
I looked at the whole setup in the field and thought that if we were going to continue, then something had to radically change, and change immediately, which is quite hard when we are actually still trying to make the show. And the week before lockdown was episode 5 we were filming and making of what effectively was a 22-week run, if you include the fact we were rolling straight into Celebrity. So it's 15 weeks usually of normal Gogglebox, and then we were doing 7 weeks straight off the back of that into Celebrity. So 5 weeks into that 22-week run, we were suddenly left with unless things dramatically change, we can't continue with Gogglebox. So I thankfully have amazing and clever technical crews in the field and in the edit. And if I deal with the field, first of all, we had to work out, well, we have 10 cameras. We've only got 10 cameras. So I have to leave them in the houses. There's no doubt about that. We cannot use the usual format of going in, rigging, and then removing the cameras and the kit and the cabling. We just can't do that. Plus, we cannot have a gallery in their homes. We can no longer enter these houses. So prior to lockdown, what we did was literally in the space of overnight, it was a sort of, I suppose, a 24-hour period in total. I found out how many cameras we could actually get our hands on, how many 900s were in the country, and we usually use 10. If I was leaving 10 in 5 households so that they had a close-up and a wide, then I needed at least another 10. Was that possible? You know, could we get hold of them? So overnight we decided that we needed to rig the households permanently till the end of the series. And so we went in fully suited and with gloves, masks, and a whole little cleaning bucket, and asked the families to leave their homes. So they left their homes for a couple of hours. We rigged it, sandbagged the tripods down, left the cameras in position, cabled everything out safely along skirting boards to where whatever was available to us, a cat flap, an open door, an open window. And we ended, you know, shoved the cable into a lockbox. And outside, I needed to make sure that the crews felt safe as well. So we had sprinter vans, which we rigged permanently for the whole series with the record decks and the gallery. And then obviously those sprinter vans were too small. They were great for 2 people who could socially distance very well, but unfortunately we couldn't have a third, and the producer needed to see what was going on as well, and to be able to communicate with families. So we split the feed. So we put a breaker in the feed, which caused all sorts of problems in the first week because I had to decide who has the feed, the camera or the producer. Right. But then the team swiftly sorted that out. So the cable came out of the house. We literally plugged in. There was a lockbox, as I said. We plugged in our cable and we split the feed, one into the producer's back of the producer's car and one into the sprinter van, which had camera and sound in. We took the logger off location because there was nowhere for them to socially distance, and they logged from home and remoted in doing that, which was brilliant. I mean, the downside was that, you know, the researcher is often back up to the producer, helps with snacks and getting everybody fed and stuff like that. So I think there was a lot of sort of doing things for yourself. We had to have portaloos, or we had to have nearby facilities, and the portaloos could only be if they had drives and were willing and happy, which most of them were, for us to put up loos. So overnight, I would say, by the time that Monday came, when we went into lockdown, I also then had to attack the edit. What were we going to do? So normally we have 8 edit suites. And I had to decide who actually needed to be in, because I wanted, least amount of people traveling, least amount of people in the suites. Everyone knows what edit suites are like. They're small, confined spaces. And so I needed to make sure that every editor could work on their own. And I realised very quickly that, unlike most shows, Gogglebox could not be done without the editors physically there, because the speed at which we need to get through the material, I need to literally jump, into an edit suite, or as I was, door open, editing from the corridor. So I was a good 3 or 4 meters apart from the editors. In those early days, we didn't know what was going on, so we were extremely cautious, overly cautious. I bleached every door handle, probably every hour. But I think ultimately, the editors, I said to them, if you feel uncomfortable coming in, it seems strange now thinking about back then, because I think we've all adapted to a way of working, but I think back then it's probably easy to forget how scared everybody was. We just didn't know what was around the corner. So everybody was really careful, and I had to sit the team down and say, look, if you are anxious, if you are worried personally about coming into work, I totally understand that, and it's not an issue. And I'm not going to think badly of you if you just don't feel comfortable coming in. Thankfully, they all did. I said what I would do is, normally there's about 32 people in the edit, and I got it down to around 10, 11 of us. Wow. And that was basically all the editors and the online editor. So all the edit producers remoted in using Blackbird, formerly Foreseen, and all the edit suites either had me in going around cutting everything from the corridor in those early days. Once we had all isolated together and I felt we were one big sort of family, really, we were brave enough to actually, if the room was big enough for me to sit at the back, I was still easily 2 to 3 meters away. But I think initially it was me in the corridor, or it was a bit like this setup, you know, somebody would zoom in or FaceTime in, and their laptop would be positioned on a cushion next to the editor, and I'd sort of walk down the corridor and there'd be these little laptops with these familiar little voices coming out of directing their editor, which was just brilliant, you know. And it was a very calm time. It was quiet and calm and eerily calm, but quite pleasant. We just put our heads down and just got on with it. And I think one of the comments from with regards to the show going out and the viewers was that it was a thing that remained a constant. Gogglebox didn't change. It didn't suddenly appear on Zoom.
You said a lot of the producer assistants are now sort of remoting in. Is that something that was easy enough to establish, and within the very short time frame that you had? Did you have any technical hitches when you first started trying to do that?
When it came to how would the edit operate, it was the Sunday before lockdown. I said, as from tomorrow, so I think lockdown message was, I don't know, was it 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock at night? But I decided that from that Sunday, the 22nd of March, that there would be that we'd have to sort of work out how we were going to do an edit with everybody pulling and building their timelines from home. So I just got 2 of the clever, brainy, technically sort of advanced editors in on that Sunday to work out how we could do it. So they used Blackbird. Blackbird's very good at obviously for pulling, and then the editors would bring that material into the edit, and then an AF would be created at the end of the evening, and then that AF sequence would then be viewed at home in the morning, and then the notes would come back to the editor. So there was a lot of backwards and forwards. When it came to slightly more crafting a timeline where you kind of you've got a sort of hour and a half timeline, you need to get it down to something more manageable, like 40 minutes to pass to a cutting suite. You kind of work with your editor, and that's when the laptops came in and they sort of span around. So in answer to your question, no, I think there's a couple of cameras that were knocked. So we had to do some quite, detailed direction to some of our cast to nudge them back. But I have we do a shot sign off every week, which is why the Gogglebox image, the wide, always remains very similar each week. And so what I mean by that is, before we start rolling, a picture on the monitor is zapped back to me in the edit, and I sign off. It's called shot sign off, and it's done at every shoot, start of every single shoot. And it'll be a picture of the Malones, for instance, of them in situ just before they roll. And I say, yep, that's great. And it's a good chance to check that, not that they do this, but, there's logos, all the usual stuff, or they're all in white, and you're like, oh, can one of them change? But ultimately, that process, sometimes if different crews went, or somebody had moved something in the room, that process could be quite long-winded. Something just didn't look right, camera too high on the legs, too low on the legs. It always needs to look the same, and I'm quite particular about that. So came up with this idea that I would get a perspex line drawing of everybody. So I'd screenshotted a family wide, and then got a very clever artist to draw a line drawing, literally, the basic required back of the sofa, where the shelves are, where the pictures are, a line drawing of everything in that image, and get it done so the aspect ratio is right. And then all they do is bung that, which is on perspex, etched into perspex, onto the monitor, and then everyone just sort of shuffles into shot. And you know what? The shots, they just get signed off immediately, so it saves everybody time. And I think each series, we come up with a little tiny way of making it, a bit easier on everybody.
Because at the moment you travel around the UK carrying rushes around. It seems slightly risky and time consuming as well. You could lose these rushes that could get damaged. Is it not possible to utilize, these fast file transfers and the cloud way of working to enable sort of slightly more efficient way of doing that?
unfortunately, you are still very much, held and restricted by someone's broadband or Wi-Fi. And if you think about, we film for 6 hours each evening, and it just wouldn't be possible. And even if we're driving to, the nearest post house, that's got to be open at when we finish at night, which is sometimes 1, 2 in the morning. Once you've driven there, you might as well drive them back. So yes, it does feel quite antiquated, I suppose. It does feel quite old-fashioned. But ultimately, we are still beholden, as I say, to speeds and Wi-Fi capabilities, and they're just not good enough in people's homes. I mean, somewhere like Mary and Giles in Wiltshire, if we have a news story and we need to get it to them, we have to download it to a dongle stick. I mean, that is by driving to a pub, or in these days, it's not really a pub. It's just, literally, where's the signal to download the stuff from London if we're trying to update some of the archive. So, there is just no signal where they live at all. So until that changes, no, Gogglebox is very much quite old-fashioned in its tone and its delivery, but we love it like that. And I think also, we still record to XD cam, and that's because actually we just time-wise, it's just quicker than wrangling material. It works. Do you know what I mean? It works. And the weird thing about sort of from a timeline point of view is, that if those tapes are leaving, Wiltshire at, 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, that they're going to be in London, 4 hours later, and they will be there in the morning. And I think that, yes, I think it would be quite nice, but we also work 1-to-1, so we can't afford to take anything in low res. So we don't have time for a reconform. So ultimately, everything has to go in full res, broadcast res, and we just can't get it any other way to the edit at the moment. So.
And
it works.
Yeah, well, this is good.
Thank you for joining us for session 2 of Broadcast Tech Fest. We're not all meeting today in person for very obvious reasons, but Broadcast is committed to delivering high quality events, whatever the circumstances, and we're not going to let a little pandemic stop us. So in this session, we're going to hear from speakers about how their businesses and how their operations have responded to COVID-19, both in the studio and reporting and broadcasting on location. We'll discuss the challenges and potentially some of the benefits of how they have adapted. The plan is that we will have a chat for about 30 minutes before taking some questions from you guys. So put your thinking caps on and send any questions that you have via the chat function. Let's meet our panelists before we jump in. So we're joined by Catherine Gomeniuk, who is a Senior Director for Sky Sports across a wide range of output, and by Morwen Williams, who is Head of UK Operations for the BBC's News Division. We're also hoping to be joined by Mohammed Akhlaq, who is the Chief Technology Officer for ITN, which, as you know, produces news content for ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5. All being well, Mo will join us shortly. Good morning, Catherine and Morwen. I'd like to begin by talking about production in the studio before we move on to reporting and outside broadcasting. And I wanted to kick off, if you could just go through, Morwen, I'll come to you first of all. If you could just begin with some of the most obvious COVID-enforced changes in terms of production in the studio. I'm thinking about the number of people involved, the type of people, and maybe just some of the absolute sort of basics of how production in the studio changed for BBC News as we moved into lockdown.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, it became really obvious that our galleries are small enclosed spaces, and that we couldn't have all the people doing all the functions we needed in our TV galleries for a start. And so starting with TV, we had to remove some of the functions from the desk. So we took out, we'd got automated ways of doing things, so automated vision mixing, and we moved to automated vision mixing, and we took out the actual vision mixer. We moved somebody into a spare gallery as well, so we could get the social distancing. But things like in the studio, the mics, the personal mics, they all went. You can still see on the main news, we've got desk mics for people, because that's just easier and cleaner. Anything that avoids that face-to-face contact, and people doing more from themselves. So we moved everything into automated studios. So our big flagship studio that we produced the Victoria Derbyshire programme, Newsnight and Mar, that had to go into the news studio, which is fully automated robotic cameras. And so everybody had to share. We had to condense some of our programming from our World Channel and our news channel, UK focused channel, into one stream at places, because we didn't have enough people to do that sort of thing. And we just didn't know what resilience levels we would need. So we streamlined quite quickly. We took out some roles and we put all those safety procedures into place. We also then, after a few days, put in perspex screens in between the roles in galleries, to help protect people. And of course, wiping down all the time. We said no external guests. They had to be by Zoom type Skype, and that anybody that did come into the studio, we clearly had to leave time and a place between each people to come in to clean down, and only one person at a time, because you needed the 2 metre social distancing. So quite a lot, quite quickly in the studios, and very similarly in radio. We went to this is our Today studio right behind me, and we went to those people presenting from home with our studio directors here putting the programme out, but actually everybody operating on video links to get eye contact with the presenters, but the presenters were safely at home in 2 different places.
And to what extent, Morwen, you mentioned the moving to a more automated studio? Was that ready to go? Did it already exist? And So this was there were moves already to work in this way, and you were able to sort of accelerate them.
Yes, in a sense, we had the technical capability. We chose still to use vision mixers on particularly on some of our most complicated programs. Some of them were automated, but on our more complicated programs, and we went to the automation straight away. And in some cases, we've put in proposals that we will keep that going forward. In some of our streamlining that COVID means we've had to do as a result of that. So some of the changes are probably here to stay.
Great. We'll come back to that. I'll ask you both about the future and what we may have learned and how things might have changed. Catherine, to what extent does what Morwen has just articulated there chime with your experience and the Sky Sports experience? Galleries are galleries, right? And the busy, hectic, creative places suddenly need to change how they operated.
Yeah, absolutely. So very, very similar case study to Morwen, as she just highlighted, that first and foremost, the biggest challenge that we faced is the safety of staff, because ultimately we are in a pandemic, and that is the most important thing to keep staff safe. Straight away realising that galleries are small spaces, a lot of people. So we actually shifted pretty much overnight from a full gallery operation, which I am just going to share a slide with you because I've got some images that I'd like to show. We shifted from a full gallery operation to an automated gallery. So we went from a full gallery, as you can see on the left, to an automated gallery pretty much overnight. We already did use automation, but not for 24/7 rolling news. So one of the biggest challenges was obviously the exposure that people had to it. And a lot of the production teams that we work with and the directors hadn't worked with automation previously. So as well, sort of going into this environment, we were having to also train people. And with social distancing, it can obviously be quite tricky. So we were using things like Teams and Zoom and having calls with people, picking up with the mics and the presenters. Our presenters actually continue to broadcast from the studio, but we massively reduced the amount of people that were coming in. We went from kind of a gallery of 17 people to a gallery of 2, as you probably saw in the picture, and kind of a newsroom of anything between 60 to 100 people, which is a really buzzy environment to be in. I think there was about 7 people during lockdown. So we massively reduced the number of people, and things like presenters with mics. We took away certain roles like floor managers and multi-skilled operators. Presenters were micing themselves up. We had to come up with plans as to them not using the same ones within so many hours, so things could be sanitized so it's safe. We had locked off camera positions and locked off presenting positions that were lit, so that we didn't have to have people on site doing that. So it was, we massively scaled back, but the ultimate thing for us at Sky was to keep providing a service to our customers. And I think that was really important, with the safety of staff in mind.
And I think, Catherine, that's the nub of it, isn't it? It's keeping everybody safe, but actually knowing in a news environment, that's what everybody wanted to know, and news audiences were massive in that time. And the flexibility of our staff has been absolutely incredible. I absolutely can't praise them enough for just adapting to this and taking it on and keep coming into the building day in, day out. It's been amazing.
Absolutely.
Presumably more when that's not just Hugh Edwards doing his own hair and makeup, is it? There's other factors in that as well.
There's a lot more than that. He's doing quite a good job of it, though.
To be fair, I agree. I mean, look, every presenter, that's become a standard feature of kind of television over the last 6 months, basically, that kind of thing. And it's been remarkable, really. What about set design or things like that? Did we have to get into? Did you have to move people away and change camera angles and things like that? Catherine, was that something that you guys got into?
Yeah, so like I alluded to on my previous answer, that we to reduce the number of people on site, we had initially locked off camera positions. So we had several shooting positions within the newsroom, and they were the ones that we stuck to. Now, and obviously social distancing plays a massive part as well. Now, initially in lockdown, we were only having a presenter on set and there were no guests. Now, as things kind of began to ease a little bit, and guests are now coming into studios, we've had to really consider the way we shoot things with social distancing to ensure that everyone is 2 meters apart. And a good example I can give to you on that is one of our programs for Saturday, which we usually do guests all together in one studio. We can't do that. And one of the main key things of that program is the relationship of Jeff, the presenter, and the guests, and keeping that relationship going while the show is on air. And we've had to split so that some guests are sat in another studio and some guests are with him. So it's how we kind of maintain that rapport, but from two different studios. And it's something we've had to really consider. I mean, I think it's worked, hopefully. But yeah, it's been challenging, but we've always managed to kind of find a way around the situation.
Let's talk a little bit about Zoom interviews and remote interviews then, because that's become it's not like they didn't happen before. We remember Dr. Robert Kelly and his daughter joining him on a BBC News segment not that long ago. But it was very unusual, or it wasn't the norm in any sense. We've kind of got used to guests in particular being interviewed via Zoom. Were there any creative challenges that brought, and or maybe creative benefits? Have we had a wider range of guests potentially because viewers are more accepting of this as a way of doing things? Well, what's your take on how Zoom and by which I mean remote interviews, non-studio based interviews, has changed things?
I mean, to your point about can you get a better range of people on, the one really great thing it has done is given us a better diversity of people from all over the country, all over the world, people that you can now get on that wouldn't have come into your studio. And it could be, the top expert, but they're a single parent and they can't come in to do Newsnight or whatever it is, and people that are nowhere near a BBC studio. So I think that's been the one great thing about that, and I do hope that element is here to stay. I mean, technically, some of them are better than others, and we did do a guide to people to say, right, this is how you do it best. I'm probably not adhering to it. My screen should be higher up, but I couldn't find a stack of paper. And we, so we did we made a little video to send to people. This is how you make yourself look as good as you can. But also, I think that it was difficult to put that into a TV package. So some of our really clever engineers invented something that made the zoom, it's called Toucan, and it made the zoom work better as part of a TV package, and the recording of it was just better. I don't know how it works. They're just amazing how they've done it. So we've adapted. We did all sorts of adaptations as well. I can talk about. We invented lots of things, really clever things to get like audiences in and via Zoom and all that sort of thing. So some of our programs were suffering from a lack of audience, and another team of our great guys invented something that would work. So Zoom and all the other methods have become a major part of the way we do things, and I do think we should use that more to get that essential guest on air, rather than as we probably would have done it 2 years ago, a year ago, send a crew all the way up the motorway to try and gather them for a 20-second clip. That's not environmentally friendly. It doesn't add to the sum of anything, really, although technically, clearly, our crews do a great job.
Of course. Mo, we'll come to you in just a moment. I'm glad that you've joined us. Hello. Catherine, just to you quickly, Sky Sports did quite a lot of, I'm a big cricket fan. I was watching some Sky cricket vodcasts over lockdown. And it was kind of fun. It was kind of, the fact that the presenters were all there and they were clearly sat in different in there, getting a chance to see Nasser Hussain's study or whatever it is, it kind of added a little something to it. What's been your take on the creative side of those kind of challenges?
Yeah, so again, to echo the points that Morwen made, which is we've had access to guests that we wouldn't ordinarily have access to coming into a studio. So again, we've done shows where you have one person in Florida and one person in Birmingham and one person in Barbados or wherever, all in one show contributing. So that has added a lot editorially to what we've done. We did use Zoom initially. It didn't really give us that creative flexibility that we desired. So we actually moved to vMix, and a lot of our shows were produced on vMix, where we were able to add kind of the Sky Sports branding and the Sky Sports style to enhance the output. And I think that, I know that we kind of briefly spoke about it yesterday, but some of the things where it's not creatively, it's not aesthetically sort of as we would usually have someone in a glossy studio in front of a camera in the lights, sometimes seeing somebody in their living room is a bit of a personal touch. And sometimes when you have guests come into studios and they're not used to that environment, it can be quite nerve-wracking. And actually having someone at home in their environment they're comfortable in, it puts them at ease. And we're so used to seeing it now. And I think that ultimately everybody's used to seeing it. I've watched shows with Ant and Dec sat in their living rooms presenting major Saturday night shows, and it's something that we've just all become very used to now.
Indeed. Thank you for that. Mo, I'm going to come to you now. Thanks for joining us. We began the discussion. We've just been the first part of the discussion on production in studio and changes to galleries and to the creative, to guests, to camera positions, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to move the conversation on a little bit now to talk about production in the field. And I wonder if I could ask you to kick off, Mo, in terms of sorting, how, if you could articulate for us the key differences, how COVID impacted the work that ITN correspondents are doing from location in terms of reporting, packages, that kind of stuff, their workflows. Can you just give us an overall summary of the most significant changes? Oh, Mo, your mic isn't quite picking up for us. Don't worry. We can't hear your audio at the moment. Morwen, congratulations. I'm going to send that. I'm going to send
that. Do you want me to pick up on that one? So was how we adapted.
Yeah, so let's talk about reporting. Correspondence.
Yeah, correspondents and in my sphere, cameras, engineers, and the whole teams, had to be socially distanced. We tried to do, you'll have seen the boom mics come in, the big stick mics, and actually they're quite a good indication of 2 meters. So everything is done via that. We had people putting pop socks over boom mics so they could throw them away at the end and wash them regularly, so that it's easier than washing the fluffy cover. And the workflows that we had to do from editing in the field, where you would all pile into the back of an edit van, had to be the editor sits in the edit van, and then if it's out in the field, that somebody sits in their car next door and either shouts through the window, or they're all on a Zoom call, and they're in different cars or standing up when it was better weather, to 3 people to produce that one piece: producer, correspondent, and the shoot edit, and we invented some new workflows again, as our clever adaptive people did. We suddenly did all that very, very differently. But just how you did interviews, how you reacted with your guests, and clearly this is in cases tragic story, and you need to be up close and personal to get some of those stories, and you can't do that. And that was a difference in the way we were gathering our stories, telling our stories, that you had to be slightly distanced, and in some cases asking a bereaved relative something over Zoom. One of my colleagues said, I'm starting every one of my conversations with, "I'm really sorry for your loss." And that was at the height of it. So we had to do a lot of adaptation in the field, and now we're readapting for winter, because you can't quite interview everybody standing in the front garden anymore, on the doorstep. So it's changing again. And what do you do about extra high levels, the Liverpool area? You don't want everybody piling in there. You have to make sure everything gets sign off to go into those sorts of areas to make sure everybody keeps safe.
And I don't know, Catherine, Morwen, Mo, happy for any of you to pick this up. To what extent, in terms of workflows, to what extent have things changed? Would it have been the case previously that the editing would have all been done remotely? I mean, would there have been a low-res kind of proxy file? Would people have done their reporting and grabbed their SD card and headed back somewhere and plugged it in? Was it working in that way, and has that changed, or are we in were we already at a hybrid kind of model in terms of those kind of workflows?
I'll start with that one. We'd already doing some of that one with, great ways of filing over the internet was already in place. But, there's something about a nice, warm, big edit suite where you can all sit and get coffee back in a building. And some cases you can do that, and some cases you couldn't do that. And we're very strict about how many people we fit in an edit suite. So there were some things that helped us. The whole IP thing, the whole internet thing has greatly helped us. The move towards more remote production was already well on its way. Just a lot of these things have been, speeded up really by this, and the acceptance of more of these ways of working, because you have a traditional way of working, because you've got a big satellite truck you could send, then you send it. But actually, you can do things in different ways. And what the pandemic has taught us is we needed to move into different ways. Through necessity, and now we can look at some of those opportunities to see how we can take that further.
Yeah, I mean,
that makes sense. Catherine, you were nodding away then.
Yeah, just the mention of remote production, and again, it's very similar that COVID ultimately has forced our hands to act a lot quicker than what we were anyway. And with the Premier League football, for example, this has now been done remotely. It's all done from Sky Austerley. So where we'd usually deploy the AR set and be on site, directors are now in Sky and they're not on site. So obviously creatively that's had a bit of an implication, and things that we've had to work around. There's been a few things, for example, with Monday Night Football, where you'd usually have pundits, you'd have Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville stood at a touchscreen to analyse the game. You can't have that anymore. You can't have two people touching the same screen. So it's meant a few changes. Obviously, the APs, and Morwen mentioned editors and edit suites. The APs have been working from home because we can't have two people in an edit suite together. But yeah, it's all things that were already roadmapped in terms of the Sky has a big push to become net carbon zero by 2030, and it's been on the roadmap for a while, but we're moving quicker towards that in the way that we're working. It's definitely forced our hand to act a lot quicker.
And I mean, sport's been at the forefront of that kind of remote production anyway, but it is still, if you go to a Premier League ground, you will still see massive OB trucks and, galleries packed with people and directors and assistants and EVS operators and all kinds of things. That obviously would have been impacted as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I mentioned, that's all now done in-house from Sky. The only people going on site are the essential people that have to be on site. Everything else is done from Sky, and that can have challenges, because usually where you'd have a director in the morning of a game going round and doing a recce or looking around the ground, and you can't have that anymore. But things that have had to be thought about to work around it.
Okay, good stuff. Mo, I'm going to come to you with a slightly difficult challenge now of trying to encapsulate some of your views in a relatively short period of time. We've been hearing from Catherine and from Morwen with regards to studio operations and reporting on location, workflows. If I were to ask you across the board, if you could just characterise from an ITN perspective, some of the most challenging things that you guys have had to navigate as a result of COVID, what would you say to me with a sort of a handful of the really biggest challenges and how you had to respond to them?
First of all, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We can.
Fantastic. As I said earlier, I'm relatively new to ITN, and I think a lot of the fantastic work that the team's done here is a testament to the quality of engineers and operations and editorial staff we have at ITN, as it is the same with, I'm sure, with the BBC, the Sky, and other broadcasters around the world. I think the main challenges here is to really radically change the way that we used to do broadcasting, and are forced to comply with the COVID safety, social distancing, etc. So one of the key areas for us was actually trying to figure out how we isolate people into certain bubbles. So we had two shifts in the gallery, for example, that never met. We had entry points and exit points that are different. We had all the sort of perspex shielding and glasses that were put up in different areas, which are normally open plan. I think from my perspective, also the gallery, the newsroom had a more bigger challenge, because in a newsroom, you generally speaking rely on conversations you hear and overhear within the newsroom to hopefully find those stories and enhance those stories. And that element was lost due to COVID-19 and remote working. But for me, remote working has always been available to us in broadcasters, but we haven't really taken that on board because of traditional ways of working, production quality, changes in workflow, difficulties in timing, communication, etc. But COVID-19, horrible though it is, right, is nonetheless a catalyst for change, and it is forcing us to use remote production in a real sense. And now I think there's going to be more opportunities for us to develop workflows that better suit our field and our sector within broadcasting. And I think it's now time for us to sort of rally around together and try and figure out how we how we use the technology that's currently available to us to hopefully achieve our broadcast objectives and our producers' goals when it comes to branding, program formats, etc.
Yeah, and we're going to move shortly to some questions from the floor. But before we do that, review really about the things that have changed where you think will probably revert back to normal. You know, the things that we've altered that will go back, and maybe some of the things that we've altered that we might hang on to a little bit that will inform what that might become the new standard, the new normal going forward. So if I were to say to you, Norman, if there was something, and I'll ask the same question to all three of you, what would be the thing that you're looking forward to seeing the back of, you know, that you'd like to return, and what will be the thing that you think, well, actually, you know what, that's something that we can build on and go from here? We might have lost Norman. Catherine, why don't you jump on and take that one if you may?
Connections, and actually see, this is a prime example. Actually being able to see people, it's going to be amazing to be able to have meetings. It's so difficult sometimes to try and have important meetings and get points across when you're doing everything over the internet or over Teams or whatever. And yeah, it'll be great to actually be able to interact with people in a room again.
I agree with Catherine there. I think that's key, really, because you know, we are humans and we like interaction, and I think most of the messages that we convey within meetings are read by body language and tone, etc. And virtual video conferencing, there's a sense of detachment almost, and you can't really engage properly. So that's something that I hope that we return to very soon. As to what we should develop on further, I think remote production is definitely the way forward. Is it remote production for all sort of forms of programming output? The answer is no. We've got to figure out which ones are better suited and hopefully develop those and move those forward, and hopefully become a better economic model as well, because it saves the stress, the hassle of people sending people out on deployments, etc. But again, I think we've got to be cautious. We've got to make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons and for the right practical reasons, safety reasons, and costs, and have a balanced view, really.
Yeah, and I think, you know, some of the things I've mentioned, like the vision mixing.
Sorry? Chris?
Sorry, Morgan, please continue, and then I'll circle back at the end.
No, I was just going to say that some of the things I've mentioned, like we are going to use fewer vision mixers going forward and automated that. But, you know, we want to get back to the personal mics, and so people can walk around and get rid of the big booms as soon as we can, as soon as it's safe to do so, some of those things. But we will keep some of the, you know, remote production as well. So some of it we'll keep, but, you know, we would like some more people back in the studio would be great. You know, absolutely, like Catherine was saying, some of the interactions like on Newsnight, it's really important to have those guests in the studio, and we just can't do it at the moment. So that's one of the things we're really looking forward to doing.
I wonder if, and again, this question's to the whole panel, have there been things which have significantly increased cost in terms of your operations? I'm not going to ask you to talk figures, but you know, are there areas where you say, yeah, that's costing us a lot more money to do X, Y, or Z? And are there things that maybe point towards potential savings in the future from a commercial perspective?
I can't comment. Sorry, Catherine, you go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I think you were maybe going to say the same thing. I can't really comment too much on the cost of things, but the obvious things like remote production is you're saving money on travel, you're saving money on people in hotels, you're saving money there and expenses by keeping everybody in house. Right now, I couldn't really comment on the cost implications. It's absolutely not my expertise. I wouldn't want to lie.
And I think I echo Catherine's view. I think she's absolutely correct, and I'm always going to say the same thing, to be honest with you. The other benefit actually is because every single broadcaster is feeling the pinch when it comes to revenues, etc. Therefore, trying to develop new programs, finding budgets, etc. is much harder. It's become harder. By having remote productions, you're actually saving money, as Catherine was saying, on deployment, hotels, etc. And that's a revenue saving that could be plowed back into productions and into sort of, the editorial teams to come up with, more programming that are better suited to that sort of environment, and therefore in the long run saving money as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And Morwen, from your perspective, any views on efficiencies or extra cost or anything like that?
I mean, extra cost, just keeping people safe, letting people, at the height of it, take taxis in and that sort of thing. But just to keep our people safe. I mean, we have gone out there with a savings plan and proposals that we actually think we can manage with fewer people going forward, which we announced in July. And some of those are we were perfectly honest from COVID insights that about vision mixing and potentially one or two fewer crews or fewer engineers, because we're doing some more things by Zoom, and we think that sort of thing will stay to an extent. So that's a minor saving, but things like some of the studios, and we're using more automated studios rather than our big studio as well, because we proved that we could do great programs like Newsnight and Mar from those automated studios. So we have proposed some savings, yes.
Very good. I'm going to rattle through some of the questions now that have come through from the viewers. Let's see. So some of these are attributed to people and some of them are anonymous. So from the beginning, what's been the biggest communication issue related to the changes in the gallery, moving a fully stocked gallery to a remote working gallery, and how were they solved? So I guess that's creative communication conversations in the gallery. Would anyone like to pick that up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm about to pick up. So one of the things from us is that obviously I mentioned at the beginning that we moved from a full gallery operation to an automated gallery. So you've instantly cut down the amount of people that you've got. A lot of the assistant producers and editors have actually been working remotely from home, but on live production. So communication is really key to make sure that they can hear us in the gallery and they're part of the production. And we also introduced the co-director role from home. Again, it's been essential that we've had to have ways to communicate while live on air. And there's been things set up for us to be able to do that. But I just think, again, we've had more catch-up, more meetings, just making sure that everybody that's working at home feels fully in the loop as those that are working on site and in the gallery.
And in our radio studios, as I say, this is the Today studio behind me. It's when our presenters they normally sit in this bit, and our studio directors sit in the cubicle behind. But it's the eyebrow. It's it's that look you give each other in a studio. Are you going to do that bit, or am I saying the weather? Are you giving it's that? And we've been doing it all on a video conferencing, and it's not quite the same. I think we've done it brilliantly, but it's a lot of extra traffic control, as it were, to just enable all that to happen, which just happens naturally. Literally with the raising of an eyebrow, you know that body language between your teams, and you lose that.
I agree with both Catherine and Maureen. Really, is that we have in ITN very traditional galleries still, and communication within the gallery is extremely key. And that's one of the difficulties, I think, when it comes to large remote productions, is how do we maintain that line of communication in a fluid way, without delays, without, God forbid, it is a loss of connection as well. What the workarounds are going to be, and I think that's some work that still needs to be done. I think it's achievable, and hopefully in the foreseeable future, in this very short near future, we should be in a position that we solve that problem.
Very good. So that question came from Leo Mindell. Apologies, Leo, I didn't credit you at the beginning. Moving on, a question from Arnold relating to automated studios and robot cameras. How are these cameras controlled? Is it by producers on site or by staff working remotely?
I mean, for us, they're pre-programmed. You put in code, and it delivers all the moves you want. So we work out in advance all the moves you'd want to make. So if it's a catwalk, if it's presenter standing, if it's presenter seated, and you pre-program all those. So you just give it a direction.
Got you. Okay, so it's almost choreographed in advance.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Catherine, would that chime with you guys, or in terms of automated cameras, or?
So yeah, very similar. We'd usually have a multi-skilled operator who can pre-program move. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we decided to lose that and have locked off camera positions so that we could have less people on site. Yeah, so we just had set positions just to reduce the number of traffic on site, to keep people safe and.
But we also have ones that in pre-COVID times for our election programme, where if you put a small camera in a space where you can't get a big camera, and then you can just remote control it off like a joystick, so by somebody sitting a bit further away. So those sorts of things we're using anyway.
I think the other thing as well, there are devices on the market. I mean, we use Teradici quite a lot here in ITN, and that extends your desktop to whatever you may be around the world with full control, in fact, and actually it's very secure. So, for most of our editing and our craft edits, we use that technology and allows full access as well. So there are ways around it. We're just trying to find the right tools for your particular requirements.
Okay, good. And finally, a question that I suspect Mo and Morwen might be best suited to you. The way that maybe the national news operations have worked with their counterparts in the regions in terms of sort of scaled back newsrooms, and what have been the implications or the impacts in terms of the relationship between national and local news operations?
After you, Mo.
Thanks. I think there hasn't really been that many difficulties. I think they've found a way around. It's all about communication and sharing of content. And I think the key here, right, is one of the things that I always find about broadcasting is that the show must go on. And people just rally around crisis scenarios to make it work. And I think that's exactly what we've demonstrated over the past 6 months or so, and we continue to demonstrate within the broadcast sector, is people make it work, no matter what the obstacles are, and they'll find a way around it. And I think that's one of the beauties about working in broadcasting, and especially when things don't go as well as they should be, because that's when the creativity starts flowing.
Yeah, and we've worked really closely with our guys, and in times when Leicester was on the first lockdown, it was our local teams that went in to deliver for us. So you saw some new faces on there, and wasn't that refreshing to see as well. And so we work, we're in daily contact, make sure that we work closely together, so we don't put too many people out there, and that we're getting the right local stories as well, because we need to reflect the country totally, and we get that with our fantastic local network.
Very good. So listen, guys, we have come to the end of the session. Time has beaten us. There's been a huge amount of fantastic work gone on from broadcasters, from news operations over the last 6 months. It's difficult to know, isn't it, how things are going to resolve themselves and when we might return to something approaching normality. But there's been outstanding work that's taken place during that time period, and it's been really helpful and useful to hear from the three of you about some of the examples of how you've managed to achieve it. So many thanks from broadcast. Thanks to our viewers for joining us live for this session and for your questions. And keep up the good work, everyone. There's a lot to be proud of from all the companies involved in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Hello and welcome back to TechFest 2020. This is a post-production panel. We're continuing the theme of producing in lockdown, and this panel focuses on the impact of the pandemic on the post-production sector, looking at how post facilities have overhauled their services from office-based to predominantly remote workflows, and looking at what the future of the post sector might be, and the creative cluster in Soho as well, which is probably less busy than it was in March. But we've got a great panel here, and I shall just introduce who we have speaking over the next 30 to 40 minutes. We have Emma Butt, who is an ADR recordist and sound editor, freelance, and Zeb Achino,
that was close.
it was close, wasn't it? But still got a massive fail. So sorry about it. I practiced that for just before, but, you got sorry. Anyway, Zeb, and I'm not going to try to say her name again, is a TV and film editor. Again, she's freelance. And we have Aidan Farrell, who is senior colorist at the Farm Group. And finally, Ollie Strauss, who's director of post-production at ITN. And the first question I'm going to put to the panelists is, it's gone really dark in here all of a sudden. Right. Well, okay. Well, it's like some sort of club. Well, okay, back to normal again. Nice. Right. Anyway, the first question I'm going to put to the panelists is, looking back to the beginning of lockdown and back in March, what was the immediate impact on your workload, and then gradually the way that you had to work? And I think this is probably a good question to start off with freelancers here. So, Emma, would you mind starting us off with that?
Thank you. That's all I can say.
Thanks, Emma.
It was a bit of a weird one in that I was booked to do ADR for quite a few months with a company. And obviously ADR, you have to be in a room with people, with the director, with the actor, and social distancing threw that out the second window. So funnily enough, that contract just kind of stopped immediately. And I had the panic that every other freelancer had of, oh, fuck, what am I going to do for work? Sorry for cursing a lot as well, by the way. It will continuously happen. But I was in a very, very fortunate position in that one of my jobs is a freelancer with EastEnders. And EastEnders, funnily enough, had to stay on the air. So I immediately went and started coming out to EastEnders. So I didn't actually properly do a lockdown. I was still coming into the BBC every week and doing mix reviews within the BBC because it had to be done in-house. So I was doing some at home and then coming in here. And straight after that, I went on to other projects that were, again, within the BBC, still had to come into the facility. And by the time I had finished those, lockdown had kind of finished. And I hadn't really experienced full lockdown. And I was back to recording, but recording in a safe way, in that we were using booths and separate studios, so that social distancing was still observed. So in my kind of way, it's not really been full-on remote working. I've not had to do any playbacks remotely, which has been amazing. And I kind of prefer it. I mean, I'm going to be the Debbie Downer of the panel probably and say that I'm not totally for remote working. I think it has some benefits, but for sound, definitely, you need to be in a building together.
Yeah. Have you done any remote working during the last few months?
I've done a little bit, but the way that we've managed to do it is that I haven't used Zoom, I haven't used any of the programs to actually do my dubbing reviews over an internet connection. The way we've done that, I'll do my mix review at home and I'll send a quick time to the clients, and they'll review it either on their laptop, or what I did with one facility was that they'd book out the dubbing suite and they'd let the client go into the dubbing suite alone and play back my mix alone in a proper room, and then just send me notes, which I'd address at home. And that worked better for me because it meant then they were listening to it in a proper way, and we weren't worrying about dodgy internet connections. And the only ADR session that I did remotely was a fucking disaster, and I'm never going to do it again.
Okay, we could maybe come back to that in a little while. Sounds interesting. And Zeb, presumably from the point of view of sort of picture post work and editing, that's slightly more something that you could transition presumably to remote working. So is that the way you went?
Absolutely. I'm opposite to Emma, and she knows this. I love the remote working. I know lockdown's been really hard for so many people, but for a lot of my family, because the weather was so lovely, I did what I used to call the lockdown lounging that they got to do, because I was able to carry on working throughout. So when it first hit, the company that I was working for were great. We went into lockdown a week before the country did. They called us up on the weekend and said, right, we're going to work it out, stay home, don't come in. We will send you the projects. And it was making a magazine show for CGTN Europe. So we were going to send drives. There was all the talk of how do we get the media to everyone without any warning. So what there were plans about sending drives and the cost and the time to do that. And what they actually did was they had the lead editor stayed in the building for the first sort of week or two, uploading everything that was needed. We used Dropbox to download everything. We did reviews via Frame.io. We switched straight to using Frame.io, which we found to be really, really useful, really brilliant for what we needed. There were a few, the sort of working out download times. The reporters we were working with had to switch to recording interviews on Skype. Because it was a science and tech show, they switched all of their output to COVID specials. So they interviewed every scientist everywhere about using Skype. So we got every angle on COVID, and we were able to keep going. We didn't factual and current affairs. We didn't rely on people going out on shoots. It just kept going. The next project I had sent me out a drive and worked that way. And they worked through a post house in Soho for all our tech support, which was a really nice way of working and keeping everyone involved as if we were in the suite, but very much alone, but still sending reviews using F-Track on that one. So I never had to do that split screen Zoom sharing thing, which was great. All of my challenges came from the fact that I've got 3 kids, so school shut down, didn't change. Everybody still expected programs to be cut in the same amount of time. So on an episode I had four weeks to make, there was no, the expectation was that even though we were in a crazy situation, the work had to get done at the same time as homeschooling my oldest, looking after a baby and a preschooler. My partner's a gaffer, so he was obviously drama shoot shut down. He was here, he could help. There's 3 of them. We are outnumbered. And so those were our challenges, trying to have Zoom calls and meet all our, meetings every day about where we were up to, and just trying to meet deadlines. So there was what was great about it was being able to work to my speed, my own time, being part of the family, being able to do that stuff and help out. But it did, because schedules didn't change, there was no allowance for that. It did mean I'd find myself sort of, working late into the night to try and catch up on the time. But I do, I enjoy that. It's, it's good and bad. I enjoy that flexibility, but you also end up, burning the candle at every end and the middle. So yeah, so that's how it affected me.
So things sort of got slightly easier once schools went back again. And yeah. Oh, by the way, Aidan, I think you might have your notifications on for Outlook or something.
Okay.
We're getting a kind of the audio thing every time. So sorry, Zeb. So things presumably, in the last few months with schools back again, have they got a little bit easier to cope with?
Yeah. It's meant that, like, today I'm alone, I can get on with my work, and it's great. A lot of the people I work for have no intention of rushing back in to edit, which is great for me, and with them back at school, that is useful. My day will still be cut in half with the school runs, but it does mean that I still, with that flexibility, I know I can make that time up, and I'm a lot more comfortable. I feel, in a way, that lockdown's given me my life back. I haven't got 3 hours of commuting. I live in London, and my London commutes are still 3 hours in total. And I haven't got to do that. I haven't got to do that horrible tube. There are so many benefits. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but for me, I could happily do this forever with little visits to Soho every now and then. I do really enjoy the projects I work on where I'm through a post house, and I have got a team who can help me with my technicals. But I really enjoy the sort of remote, not having to worry about other family members and me passing things on to them. I can keep my mum in I don't know if we're in bubbles anymore. Who knows what we're in these days?
Who knows, yeah.
If we're in a bubble, I haven't got to worry about her and me. I can still throw my kids at her if the school's shut. That's the next fear. If the schools go down again, we go back. But it's become a lot more manageable, and I'm happy to carry on working in this way for the foreseeable, really.
Okay, good stuff. Ollie, looking at what you were doing right at the start, I got some photos sent over of some streets being dug up near you, some cables being laid down or something, and then tell us all about this. What happened? Oh, Ollie, we can't hear you. That's it.
In a completely different way. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah, cool. In a completely different way to the way that Emma and Zeb have been working. We had to operate on scale. We had to, we have a lot of fast turnaround projects through our facility, and it was a case of how do we get sometimes up to 5 or 6 editors working off the same material. How do we get our edit assistants to distribute that material? And it was really quickly obvious that sending drives out and physical kit out was just not going to be an option. We were in a pretty fortunate position that last year we started exploring Teradici as a way of allowing people to work from home. So we'd actually had this idea of, wouldn't it be awesome if, when you're not attended, you could work from home and you could get a little bit of your life back. So we were already a year into that process of developing our sort of remote ecosystem. So we were it couldn't have been more fortuitous. So we very quickly switched to Teradici. So every single person's connected back into our infrastructure, and if you haven't used it, you can't really explain the experience, because it's like being sat in front of that computer. You don't, in terms of your interaction with it, the only time you realize that you're not in front of the computer is when you want to plug a drive in, or you want to plug some music or something into it and you can't get it in. That's the only time you realize you're not there. And then alluding to what you were saying, Jake, we kind of thought, right, well, we've nailed offline. How's lockdown? What sort of state is lockdown going to manifest itself in? Are we going to be able to get to the office? How are we going to QC stuff? How are we going to deliver stuff? We need to be, how do we make ourselves as resilient as possible? And I had this, someone dug through my water pipe a year ago outside my house.
Right.
And I went outside to go and give them what for. And I said, who are you? And they said, we're EU Networks. And I don't know why it sort of lodged in my mind. And then when all of this kicked off, I looked on, I went on Google and sort of had a little look, and I was like, EU Networks runs right past my front door. So very, very quickly we contacted them, and they managed to install a 48-core fiber into my house that goes right back to our office. Took a full grading suite home. Very fortunate that my wife is an online editor. So we were like, right, if we're properly locked down, I was like, Helen, you are master QC and delivery. We will line feed play out from the house if we need to. So right here in the room that I'm in, I've got a grading monitor in front of me. I've got a video encoder that I can go live to transmission from here, and I've got uninterrupted power supply and everything. We're set up like a sort of mini transmission center.
Amazing.
So pretty wild.
And that's kind of seen you through, presumably. On the sort of technical side, you're pretty comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, this is belt and braces business continuity here. We haven't used it that much because lockdown didn't take the shape that we thought it was going to. But, as we ease back in to lockdown now, who knows? We are using it, and I'm talking to you. I've got a fantastic 1 gig internet connection that I'm talking to you on. So, I've lucked out a little bit. But no, we haven't had to use it in full force yet.
Great. We'll come back on to exactly the sort of practicalities of how post-production was working in the last few months. But Aidan, well, first of all, I think your Outlook notifications are still pinging.
Because we had technical problems earlier, I've had to switch laptops, and this is not my laptop, so I'm afraid
right.
Somebody else's email coming in. So I'm trying to knock it off. Yeah.
Oh, bad luck, mate.
Okay, so, how it affected me? I mean, it's different from my point of view. There's a personal issue, and then I'm thinking of what we had to achieve and what we had to do to get through regarding the farm as a group. And bearing in mind that we've got the studios in London, Manchester, and Bristol, and there's a lot of consideration to take into account very rapidly. I'm a bit like Emma. I couldn't. I've been in every day. From my personal point of view, I've been grading in every single day since lockdown. Right. I couldn't think of anything worse than, I think it must be an Irish thing, because I just want to look somebody in the eye and say, tell me to my face that you don't like it, and tell me why. And not over a Skype or a Zoom chat. I want you to. And so that's my personal. And I mean, to be honest, there were from the top. It is job dependent. I'm not saying remote working is not for for the way forward, or the way we're partly of the way we're going. I think it's a job specific thing. The jobs that the projects that I've been working on over the last few months, we're very lucky in the fact that we've got most of them in the can. So there were films for like The Third Day for Sky and HBO and Riviera, the Salisbury Poisonings. So they were the drama type jobs, and there were a lot of feature docs. a lot of those were 4K UHD, originated maybe on 6K, lots of VFX, lots of creatives involved. There's no way on earth anybody could have done that. So I was, could do that from home, because you're talking about shifting media, VFX coming in from various countries, from various vendors, edit changes constantly, all in 4K UHD, plus the HDR consideration. So we made, Claf at the time, we had to think so rapidly in how we were going to structure the next few months. I mean, to be honest, it was a bit like the Michael Fish scenario back in the Storm, because I remember one night doing, I think the early days of working on the third day, and somebody came into the room and said, "Oh, they say they're going to lock down London or something like that." And we're all going, "Oh, no way, no way." It's a bit like the Michael Fish thing. And of course, by the Monday we were found ourselves in that situation. So a bit like Ollie, we had, around 105 avids working, most of them, generally working about 80 Teradici licenses a week or whatever. I think the guys in Manchester, Bristol said there's something like 57 edits going as well. The offlines were great. Some of the onlines are fine. I think the problem we had was working with Flames and Grades and VFX. That the VFX guys were happy to work from home remotely. A lot of the online finishing, where you have to understand, as I said, it's a type of job, and it's job dependent, because I could spend a day on one scene, and we're looking at not just every frame, but every pixel of every frame, and working on, and there's no way on earth that somebody can see that unless they have a proper X300 or a proper grade 1 monitor at home, which most people didn't. And I'm just talking about the finishing side rather than the offline side now. So I found the best way to get through these last few months was for me to come in, where I would have access to all the 4K files. We had the faster internet, obviously, and then my clients at the time, again, we use Clearview or Streambox a lot, where they would take an HD output of my 4K feed, and we would spend days literally, as if they were in the room and communicating on Zoom or Skype or Teams or whatever. But generally what I found was that would be the initial grading sessions. And then by June, the same creatives came into the building, and we would start to do a second pass or a third pass, into that. I don't think there were very few instances where we would sort of just do a straight Clearview or Streambox session, and that was it signed off, because of course you can do that on certain jobs, but I think that was just to get it into a good place, and then we come in and do it. I mean, I've just been speaking to the audio guys, the audio mixers, because all our audio guys generally worked from home as well. They had a sort of a small desk and speakers, but they would do a sort of a mix at home, and then book in a few days or whatever to do tweaks or whatever in a final review in the suites here. So likewise, the Flame guys, they were the ones that did work from home, were using they would sort of mirror the VNC in or whatever, and so their suite would be in the farm, and then they would just work. The problem we have is monitoring, to be honest, and also the second problem we had, although I'm not responsible, or I can't gauge not only somebody else's internet, but who's pulling on it. So that's something that we didn't really consider, because obviously everyone was working from home and everyone's trying to get a slice of that pie. So that was the main problem for me, as in addition to that, the building next door, which was once a 7-story building, they decided to start demolishing on the day of lockdown. So I've had drilling going on. So I'm trying to deal with that and the Skype, and look, it's been great. So, but as I said earlier, I'm with Emma. I like the human touch. I want to be with people. I want, to be honest, I would say every single client that I've worked with since lockdown would have the same attitude as me. I hear what Zeb is saying about it. It is a wonderful thing to be able to do it from home and all, but it is depending on the job. And I feel that to get that group creative discussion going, and it's much easier to have everyone in the room to knock it out and to talk about it, and and that's just my personal preference. So going forward, that is, I think, depending on what's going to happen in the next few weeks or whatever, I think, like Ollie, we're all ready. We've got everything in place for remote working. All our creatives have generally started coming back into the building now. Sometimes we've done COVID protection sort of where we won't allow sort of 4 people in the suite or whatever at one time, or depending on the size of the edit audio or grading suite, that'll be dependent on the clients that come in. But essentially we'll have a few people in, and then we'll have a second room where they will also have a full grade 1 monitor or whatever to see what we're doing live. So so basically it means it's taking up an extra room if they're not in the room with me. But generally there are people in the room with me. It's like how many, because I'm used to having quite a lot of clients.
Right, so they can all cram into other rooms.
Yeah, and then they realise there's no sushi or cappuccinos anymore, and then they all want to go remote again. So it's all right.
So Emma, obviously you've been going back into these kind of audio environments the whole time during lockdown. As you say, it's not really been lockdown for you. How's it been? I mean, what has been the kind of process in terms of social distancing and making sure that you can work with clients and also have the space to finish your work? And Aidan, maybe it's a good idea if you don't mind putting yourself on mute while I was talking, just for the notification thing. Thanks, mate. Emma, over to you.
I was finding it second hilarious. It was like a sound effect going off in the background. It's brilliant.
True.
How did I find it? Is that what you said?
Yeah, and how did you work with clients? Similar to what Aidan was just saying, usually you would be in an environment, wouldn't you, with others?
It's been a bit of a weird one. Like I said, okay, so the ADR session, that was the worst one of my career. Basically, with ADR in the UK, Ireland is slightly different. In the UK, dialogue supervisors want to be in an open plan room. Right. So it means that engineer, dialogue supervisor, actor, director, and possibly producer are all in the one room together. What's happened now is it depends actually if it's an American-owned or if it's a British-owned company. American-owned companies do not want operators in the same room as clients, any clients. They want the operators to be totally alone. And this is what happened within this session. So I had to do an ADR session and I couldn't be in the room with anybody. So it meant that I was in a studio alone. It was hardwired into another studio next door, and the room was big enough to allow for social distancing. So the director, dialogue supervisor, and actor were allowed to be in the room together. But what that means is I have no idea what they're hearing. I don't have the same feed as them. I also can't see. So the only way I can see is by setting up a Zoom connection. And if that Zoom connection is dodgy as feck, which is also what happened, I totally lose my eyes. So I'm flying blind in a session. And it's, I'm sure any operator will tell you, whether you're sound, grading, anything, if you can't see people's reactions, if you can't read the room, you're fucked. You're essentially fucked. And that session is going to go horribly wrong. And that's what happened. And I think this is one of the downfalls of remote working. So that was an American-owned company. British-owned companies actually are more inclined to allow the operator be in a room with clients. And that's what's happened with a lot of my jobs. So it's made it a lot easier. So dub reviews, where I'd usually have 2 or 3 people in a room with me, it's now been cut down just director or just producer. And they will now have final say. So it's actually made signing off dub reviews a lot easier. Because you've less people involved and you've less people arguing in the room of saying, no, I want that louder, no, I want it quieter. It's just one opinion rules all.
What happened with the previous example where it all kind of went wrong? Were they trying to communicate something to you that you weren't aware of?
Yeah, basically there was a problem with their headphone feeds. And I was trying to address the problem. And because it was a technical problem, I needed to physically go into the room and fix it. And because I couldn't, it meant that the clients had to basically keep on coming out of the room. Every time they came out of the room, the cleaning crew had to come in and sterilize the room. Then I could look at the tech issue. There wasn't enough time in the schedule to allow me to properly address the tech issue. So I would try and put a patch on it, basically. leave the room, they'd come back in, same thing would happen again, and it was a rinse and repeat for the whole day. And I literally, thankfully they couldn't see me because I was low, but I spent my whole session just going like that with my head in my hands, being like, I can't fucking believe that this is happening. And it was a new client as well that I had never worked with, so I'm sure they thought I was absolutely fucking useless and didn't know what the hell I was doing, when actually what had happened was my hands had just been tied behind my back and I couldn't work right.
Zeb, for you working remotely and you know, kind of interacting with clients, I suppose, and getting that feedback that Emma's just talked about, did you have sort of established ways of doing that worked well for you, or did you have similar sort of communication problems?
I think using Zoom was useful, but obviously everyone's got Zoom fatigue pretty quickly. I found Frame.io, because it's offline, and a lot of the time before lockdown, you know, I might be cutting a doc or an obs doc, and for the first sort of 3 weeks, I barely speak to the edit producer or person in the room with me. You know, they send me the script via email. I send them a cut to watch while we carry on working. We don't need to, it's lovely to be in the same room. I've made some great friends that way, but it's not necessary for us to be there. One of the projects I did, I worked with an edit producer that we've been saying that to each other for years, and it was lovely to work. We know each other quite well because we've had time together, but we could get on really well on Frame.io together, because, you know, you can leave notes at exactly the point that you need to leave them on the sequence, so I know where this, you know, if it's a bit ambiguous, it's, you know, then you pick up the phone and chat. But it is that keeping lines of communication open is what makes it work. I've spoken to people going forward, and they've said what would be lovely is that everyone can get, when we can all get back into the post houses together and work together, and that is nice, but they won't, like execs have said, they won't be allowed to just pop in. It's like Aidan was saying, you can't suddenly have loads of people in your suite. They can't just pop in and see you. So while it might, you know, I'm sure it'll get better, but at first, while it'd be nice to have people back, you'll still be very confined to your room. There'll be no sort of surprise visits, which has pros and cons. There's no surprise viewings that you didn't have scheduled in, but it does mean you're sort of there, but you can't be, no one else can be there. So, you know, it's all very organised and planned. As I said before, I'm happy. I would love a perfect balance where I get to carry on working from home, all my rough cuts. I've been cutting quite a few dramas lately, shorts, and I meet the director when they drop the drive off, 2 metre distance, marks on, everything sanitized before we touch the drives, etc., and all the rules. But it's been nice to meet them, have a quick chat, work remotely, and then not on these projects, but in the future, it'd be nice if we could do that remote and then maybe have sessions together towards the end. Once we get out of this habit of everyone has to be bums on seats in the same room when you're barely speaking to each other. You know, so it's nice to have a lunch partner and stuff, but for a lot of people with caring responsibilities or gyms to go to or whatever, you know, lives that you want to have, it's quite nice to not have to do that trek and be 41. But it's nice to, I mean, this is dull, but it's nice to be able to put a wash on while I'm here, or get a delivery and not have to squeeze it into the 30 minutes I've got at night after a commute. And then, you know, it's nice to have a balance back.
Yeah. No, I think you've summarised pretty well what a lot of people are thinking, although I suppose what it might mean for post-production houses got all these expensive offices in Soho. There's going to be a lot for them to think about over the next sort of 6 months to a year or so. We can come to that in a minute. But Ollie, what about for the way you've been working and all of your people? You've been working remotely. How's that sort of client interaction work for you?
It's quite interesting actually hearing Emma and Zeb talk about their different experiences, and actually we've got a load of different sort of technological solutions in place for collaboration. So equally, we use a platform called Sony C, which is kind of the equivalent of Frame.io that you can use, sort of give accurate frame time code accurate markers that are important to Avid. We've got an NDI stream that comes out of the edit suite, so any of our offline suites can stream a live view of to their producer. We're giving producers full Avid edit suites, so producers can drop stuff into bins. Editors can drop stuff into bins, and producers can open them immediately and review them. And we're using Teams, Zoom, Skype, you know, every kind of platform you can imagine. But I don't think we've nailed it. It's a really weird one. Is that it's, you know, all of these solutions are great, but there's something intangible about being in that room with somebody, and the sort of creative ideas that flow from that. So I think what we've realized over the last 7 months is it's kind of been a bit about compromise and a bit of kind of like using the right tools for the right project within that sort of tool set that we've got available, and kind of muddling through a little bit. The future, I see exactly what Zeb's saying, in that you kind of have this, I think what everyone's dubbed the hybrid approach, right? So you go and spend a couple of days in attended, and then you go and do the rest of it at home, because it's great. From your point about not traveling, like I don't sit in a room in a suite all day, but equally I've knocked 3 hours off my day every single day. I'm dropping my kids off at school. It's all of those benefits that you're talking about are just massive difference to my life.
Have you had to go back to your HQ?
So I've been back now about seven days in the last 7 months. We've got some other projects going on at the moment. I'm going into once a week at the moment, but actually business as usual is kind of plodding on. Now, the hilarious outcome of this whole remote working thing is our core facility is actually only 34 craft suites. As of today, we're running 71 craft suites. So in terms of the scalability, the fact that we didn't need to take additional accommodation, we didn't need to carry on building, and looking to the future, we're toying, as I'm sure anyone who has a footprint in London is looking at, okay, do we need this? And our view is kind of, well, if it goes to a hybrid approach, actually what it gives us is the ability to grow without physically growing our footprint. So rather than ditching a load of accommodation, we can just become a bigger business.
For you, Aidan, and the farm group, obviously you've got quite a few big offices in London. You've got Bristol and Manchester. There's a lot of kind of real estate that you're using up at the moment. And you're saying that creatives are starting to go back to that office environment. But, what has been the impact on the farm in terms of...
I mean, we've had to react very quickly, because we've been lucky and very fortunate, because we do a diverse amount of types of work. So because we've got a lot of LE work, light entertainment work, and we've got a lot of comedy, and we've obviously got a lot of dramas and commercials. So in a way, it's for example, we had a lot of food commercials come through during the lockdown, because obviously they were the commercials that were being shot. So because we could facilitate that, it was great for us. We obviously had a lot of dramas going on, as I said earlier. But I hear just back to what Zeb was saying. I totally get it, and I totally understand that. But the flip side is that, a lot of the younger creatives here, or operators or whatever, they, besides our clients and what the clients wanted, but they, maybe it was a novelty at first, the first month, and the weather was good being at home. But I think there's also, it's not really good for a 20-year-old or a 22-year-old to be at home all day long.
I fully agree.
And I generally do that. It's good for them not to be, out of their home environment and in a communal workspace, communicating with people and reacting and interacting with people. So I think that's, we've given people a choice of whether they want to do it remotely from a start point of view. Mm-hmm. And most of the, people are coming back. In a way, actually, one of the problems we had was that we couldn't let everyone back at once, because more people wanted to come back than we could safely allow. And so I did worry, and still do, about the state of mind of a lot of the people, because it's difficult work from home, and I know it's okay for certain people, but when you maybe are a young editor and you've got 2 kids and you're living in a 1 or 2 bedroom flat or whatever like that, it's difficult, And then from my own personal point of view is that I found that because I was here every day, trying to get, if I needed something doing or changing, or as in from an editor or whatever, an online guy, the problem was, because they were at home, they might be working on their own time. Like the problem was, so they might be doing something at 9 in the evening when I should be finished. So I found myself constantly working around the remote workers' time. because they're too busy putting the wash on when I really wanted them that day. So, so it was, and I understand why, because they're at home, they can only do certain things at a certain time. You know, maybe it's because of the kids or dinner time or whatever. But they seem quite basic, but it is a lot to take into consideration. So the other aspect I want to talk about is how what I found when Emma was talking about the reviews were easier, I found the complete opposite, because until people started coming back into the room. Now, if we were doing Clearview sessions or Streambox, that's one way of how we were grading. But on a few projects where I was grading, I'd obviously have lots of meetings and lots of Skype meetings, whatever, and we wouldn't go via a Streambox or Clearview grading session. I would make files at the end of the day, and they would be sent out, and then we'd come back. So I found when it was non-attended by any, whether it's through Skype or whether it's through Clearview or in the room, so for non-attended grades, I found the exact opposite to Emma. I found the notes coming back were huge, and it also seemed that the files were going out to so many different types, various amounts of people, and they weren't communicating with each other. They were just coming back with conflicting notes constantly, as opposed to if they were in the room with me, they would be all sort of generally, you know, we'd come to some sort of an agreement. So I found myself taking much longer to do certain things or certain jobs when they weren't in the room or via a stream of some sort. So just doing file-based reviews, I sort of knocked that one on the head pretty sharpish, to be honest, because that was sort of taking up too much time. And also, I think what was happening was the people who the files were going out to were probably had a little more time on their hands because they weren't in the office themselves. So they were probably looking at everything I did 50 times and going, like, and sort of picking up on everything. So you have 15 people doing that, then you've got a stack load of notes like that. And then you've got to address those notes and then make new files. And it was an ongoing process. So that's why I want people back in.
Yeah, that's good. I'm very conscious of time, and we have some questions, so we'll have to answer these fairly quickly because they appear to be directed to individuals, which helps. So question 1 is for Emma, and it's quite simple. Do companies want clients to wear masks in sessions?
Varies. It depends on the situation. Most companies want you to wear them in communal areas. And then if you're in a dub review, it depends on yourself and the director. If the director wants to wear a mask, then you're both respectful and you wear it. If the room is equipped so that the airflow can be properly recirculated so that it's fresh air coming in and it's not the same air being reused, then it's totally up to the engineer and the director. So it varies. Okay, there is another one for you as well, Emma. Is there anything workflow technology challenges resolved wise, which could convince you to, basically, could you be convinced to work from home on posting audio stuff if the technology and circumstances were right? I will say that even before COVID, I did work from home a lot. So sound editing wise, any sound editors who are online right now will know that you primarily work from home. You're very rarely in a facility. It's dubbing reviews and ADR that you generally tend to be within the facility for. So I do work from home. I don't have an issue with it, but I just find that there's certain aspects of the sound process that personally, ADR specifically, there's still not been a very viable solution found to make that work properly. So I'm totally against it for ADR, but everything else I could be convinced. Fair enough. Ollie, there's one for you here. Please, could you tell us a bit more about your Teradici workflow? Does it just remotely control existing workstations?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it does. So we've got the workstations in the office, which are connected to our shared storage and all our sort of clever workflow orchestration stuff. And then we've got 2 different models. So we either ship a hardware client that people just plug into a couple of monitors, or you just install the software on your computer. And the way that Teradici differs from the other solutions that are out there, so Teradici and RGS are very similar, but when you compare it to something like TeamViewer or one of these other screen sharing The key difference with Teradici and RGS is that it only sends you the changing pixels. And the beauty of that is that, you know, if you can have a dual screen Avid setup, and actually your bins aren't changing. So all that's changing really is the cursor going through your timeline and your viewer window. And you can make that as small or as big, depending on how much bandwidth you've got. So it's just a really, really sort of bandwidth optimized way of doing remote workstation control. I feel like Jake's frozen.
I think he might be. Either that or he's just very
interested.
I think you've done.
Well, I'll just say then quickly, going back to while I'm here, I think you're absolutely right, Aidan, about people need people. I know this is totally back off subject. People need to be around people, and I think working together and being able to see each other is really, really important. And it's like Ollie was saying about the hybrid thing. If our industry could be comfortable with how people are comfortable to work, then that would be a really, really a useful thing, rather than people being forced in if they're not comfortable, but equally having the option to come in. And I think that would make a massive difference. I don't want to never see anyone again. There are days, but I want to.
It was also interesting what Jake was saying at the beginning about what's it doing for the post community, for the Soho community. And actually, one of the weirdest things that's come out of it from us is that even though we're a London-based facility, 70% of the editors we're using at the moment are actually outside the M25. They're all regional. So actually, the post community has spread. You know, the people who are using, you know, we're using regional editors now. So actually, it's a real big question mark over that and how we actually all continue to be a community.
Yeah, and also last thing. So the thing. So I know we've got to go. I was going to say also our schedules. Maybe we should all just relax a little bit more, so everyone's got time to put a wash on or have a long lunch, whether you're in or out. That's all I'm saying.
Sounds nice. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm back again. I'm not sure what happened there. Oh, good. We have one little, probably just about time to squeeze in a quick question to Aidan, because there is one here. You mentioned Clearview. How does it fit in your workflow, and would you recommend it?
Yes, it's really good.
Oh,
no, it's fantastic. I, as a case example, on one of the projects on the third day, I had clients in London, Bristol, the south of France, and Italy, I think, all remoting in to one session, or all the grading sessions. It was fantastic. At the time, what I recall, they're not seeing it UHD, so they're seeing it in a 1920 1080 sort of. But yes, it worked, and they all monitored on their Macs. And then when they came in, I was curious. I asked Mark Munden and Philippa, you know, how different was it from being at home to seeing it once you start seeing it again. And some shots, obviously, some scenes, he was surprised because they were making comments on things and giving me grading, steering me one way. And then obviously when they see it in the proper room, but generally it was pretty good. So yes, Clearview was a great platform to work on, to get us through these last few months, and obviously the next few months as well. So yeah, and I found out that Clearview, because obviously one important factor is the Clearview, I think, are doing now an HDR stream, so we can stream. So because obviously that's been one major issue for us, if we're in a Dolby Vision environment, how do we attack that situation? As in, because normally you would grade the HDR first and then work backwards or whatever downstream. So when we had Dolby Vision jobs, I'd have to grade them in SDR, stream it SDR to the clients, and then go back into HDR, you know, so, and then down again to SDR for the XML. So it was quite difficult, but it's quite encouraging that Clearview now, I've been told, now have a service where we can stream HDR.
Good. Great. I'm being sort of looked at in a way that suggests that we need to stop. So can I just say thank you very much to everyone? That was really fascinating. And I mean, apart from the nice little noises in the background, I think technically it seemed to work right. I'm losing me as well.
My pinging is a lot less than the episode.
Nice one. Well, take care all, and I hope to see you all very soon. And thanks again for taking part in this.
Hey everyone, welcome to this afternoon's studio panel. My name is Heather and I work at Broadcast Commissioner Index. So the plan for today on this panel is to learn a little bit more about how studios have been coping with all the sweeping changes that have been demanded of studios in the past year, and how the tech innovations have helped to enable some of these changes. We'll also be having a quick Q&A at the end, so please do submit your questions and we'll do our absolute best to answer them. So joining me today is Andy Waters, who is Head of Studios at Doc 10, John O'Callaghan, Operations Director for BBC Studios, Roger Morris, Managing Director at Elstree Studios, and Cara Shepherd, who is Managing Director at Twickenham Studios. So, hey everyone, fingers crossed we don't have any technical difficulties, but if we do, just please bear with us. I'd like to start off by asking what happened to each of you guys in terms of your forward bookings when lockdown hit earlier this year, and were you able to do anything to keep your studios open, and how did you manage all this sudden change? Andy, shall we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yes, as you can imagine, when it sort of broke, our big shows literally fell off a cliff. Unfortunately, we were very lucky to be approached by BBC Education to spring into action to do BBC Bite Size. So we had our virtual studio ready to be put into use. We've got all our set designers at home building the environment, and we managed to get that set up and running within a week. And so to be able to sort of broadcast to the nation from the beginning of April, a lesson every day was a great thing to be involved with, and just a really important bit of our business. Apart from that, the only other bit of work we did over those initial months was Newsround, of course, part of the news service which the BBC were rolling out to kids. And it wasn't really till July that business started picking up back to sort of normal levels. But I'll let the others talk about their experience.
Yeah, sure. John, shall we go to you?
Sure, yeah, very similar to Andy's experience, really. But we also were delivering some news content and political programming. So at Television Centre, that continued throughout, and it continued throughout the lockdown altogether. We also mounted a few dramas. So there was a Talking Head drama during lockdown here at Elstree. So a number of things, but obviously heavily reduced workload.
Cara?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like all the studios, as opposed to post facilities, really, we've got, space to our advantage, really. So it makes a lot of the protocol a bit easier, probably, for us to put in place. And, a lot of work was done here pretty much straight away that enabled us to keep running throughout. And I think actually we were the first COVID compliant site to continue shooting, which meant that we've stayed busy the entire time, which has been fantastic. We've got declarations, we've got an app that everybody, including myself, has to fill out every single day before they're allowed on site, temperature checks at every entrance, there's signage everywhere, and the whole, there's single entry and exit points, and that was done pretty much straight away, which has enabled us to stay open, which has been great. So it's stay on top of that and the advice from the government right now.
Yeah, and I'll touch back on that in a moment, actually. I'll just quickly check in with Roger about how you guys were managing your forward bookings.
Yeah, I mean, we have a slightly different business model in that we have long-term contracts with the BBC, with John, and with other people such as Sony Left Bank, Netflix, and we also have a production village. So we actually never closed. We actually put in very important restrictions on coming onto the site, but all our clients have signed up, and we've never actually closed. And so any production activity has been down to the contracted clients we actually have on the site. And John kicked off very early on. When I say kicked off, I mean in the meaning he kicked off his production schedule in about June. But in March, we kept an eye on what was happening in other parts of the world, and we called our guidance Government Plus, as opposed to just government. And we actually managed to maintain a working site throughout. We have, obviously, the number of people attending the site has greatly reduced, in the sense that quite a lot of people are working from home, and some of the production schedules have been postponed, but that doesn't mean to say that they haven't been cancelled.
Yeah, well, that's really encouraging to hear, because I wanted to ask what steps each of you took to create that COVID-safe studio environment. I understand that there was quite a lot of collaboration going on across the industry. Andy?
Yeah, so like Roger, we never closed either. We obviously had to spring straight into action with BBC Bite Size. And then, come June, obviously the football calendar came back. So we had lots of match of the days to cover, including sort of live coverage of the Premiership. So we need to make sure we had a completely COVID compliant site. Some of the things we did was remote working for people from home, with sort of streaming the output of studios, so that producers could be based in their kitchen and seeing rehearsals happen. We also had a one-way system around the building, perspex screens in all our galleries, and of course the 1 meter plus rule around face protection, lots of hand sanitized stations, a lot of the sort of standard stuff which you're seeing across most industries now, because very quickly we had to get a site fully up and working again.
Yeah, very similar experience, Heather, from us. We actually worked with a space planning company, so did a lot of work on galleries and production offices on what would be a safe level of people we could have in there, where they could sit. So a lot of the protocols that Andy's mentioned, we put in place. We created a document for each of our sites, so the productions could use that when they were creating their risk assessments and coming onto our site.
Yeah, we actually had an early on problem, in fact, in the sense that I introduced wearing a face mask back in March, and the reason I did that was that we were looking at what was happening in other parts of the world, and as it's a private site, we did have people coming on board and saying up to the site and saying, well, it's not a government instruction, and we had to inform them that they weren't allowed on the site with face masks. And we've had a paramedic permanently at the front of the building doing temperature checks, and you can also have COVID testing if you want at the front of the building. We've done all the usual stuff. We still adhere to the 2 meter as opposed to 1 meter spacing. We discourage any sort of grouping of people. We have areas actually zoned so that people stay in their own bubble, so they don't actually mix. The idea is they don't mix with others on the site. They stay in their own bubble, and John's got quickly at the moment up there that are all in their own bubble on the site. We've done that. We've actually noticed that, as I say, a lot of people are working from home, but when people do come on site, they now find it totally acceptable that they abide by the rules and regulations of the site, which is fantastic.
And Cara, have you had a similar experience?
Yeah, I think we've worked, really closely with our clients, and we've kind of offered as little or as much support as they want. And I think quite unsurprisingly, a lot of the productions have lent on us for help, and it's about making it easy for our clients. And so, we've put a great deal of money and time and thought into how we can make that easy for clients. And again, as I said, we've got space to our advantage. So, we've helped a lot of our clients. As the other guys have, just because we've had to. Necessity dictates that, really. But yeah, we've been able to welcome back all of our productions, and although you have people that are based in cutting rooms or offices that are able to work from home, there are still things that can't be done from home, and obviously there are suspended productions. But we've got dub stages here, colour grading theatres, ADR, everything that does actually require people to be here. So we've just had to make that as easy and accessible as possible, quite simple, and being quite transparent about our rules, and as I said, just wholeheartedly making it easy for our clients.
Yeah, and we've mentioned things like streaming in our kitchens and even doing these virtual webinars. Can I ask how tech developments have helped you guys to enable these changes to ensure that your studios can be COVID safe? Cara, we'll go straight back to you.
Yeah, I think, just going, for example, to dub stages, there's been a lot of remote approval, because obviously, when you have a creative in the room and you've got directors, producers, etc., a lot of people have been able to remotely approve the work that we've done, which has meant a lot of our creatives have been working, and it's enabled them actually, unusually a great deal of time to be creative in their own space, and has led to a little bit more creativity, which has been nice. And then, remote review and approval of sound edits, of mix that we've done, asking for notes and grades. We've been able to do that remotely, which we already had in place, usually for our international clients if they wanted to review and approve in LA. So that has actually worked quite well, and has been utilised probably more than ever.
Yeah, and John, can I go to you?
Yeah, a similar thing. Our use of technology has been primarily around that, remoting people, creating space within the building. We've also introduced other things like UVC for cleaning. So in one of our galleries in Television Centre, we've installed UVC cleaning. This is over and above the normal cleaning that you would do. You can flip the gallery into UVC mode. So we've done things like that as well, to enhance the whole experience.
Great. Roger?
Yeah, I mean, we're just about to introduce, because we've tried out quite a few track and tracing app type devices and contactless entry systems. We've got one that we've purchased, which is about to go active at this moment in time. Other than that, we were having to do it sort of manually. And the other thing, of course, we've done is we've got some ozoning machines, which is a bit extreme, but we do that on areas that we find that people have actually utilised, and we feel that they should be cleaned immediately. And we also have some electrostatic fogging devices that are used on the site, which are done with all our clients once they've used a certain area. We also have a regular routine of going around disinfecting all the common areas. Our maintenance team go around very visibly at 7 o'clock in the morning every day doing that. We insist, as I say, on mask wearing. The technology side for us has been more to do with the communication side, using all the, I mean, you're using this particular device, but we've also obviously used Teams and Zoom to chat with our clients and meet with our clients. A lot is done remotely, but we are, probably we'll all agree that we run a creative hotel, if you like. And so we have to be, we're the staff that have to keep the creative hotel going. So we can't personally work away from the creative hotel. We have to be here and attend to all their potential problems. We also have single use. I found this amazing, because when I looked at one of the guidance things around, they failed to mention WCs and toilets. And we also have toilets made single use. So we have locks on the door so that you cannot use a multi-toilet other than one person at a time.
Andy, have you done anything with any toilets?
No, I think they're if they're being used in the sort of standard way at the moment. What we have at Dr. 10, though, we're a very large facility. So we've got multiple studios, multiple galleries and ancillary spaces. Unfortunately, we've also got a huge amount of connectivity between all those different rooms. So when we've had different productions coming in, being able to split out the creative teams into different spaces has been really useful. So, you've been able to put different parts of a production team in different rooms, or whether it's different members of a lighting team or a graphics team, spreading out across the facility so we don't over-occupy rooms has been really helpful for us. And I mentioned before, just being able to stream rehearsals of our studios to individual producers, which might be based in London or somewhere else in the country, saving them actually getting on the train and coming in, and just reducing the load of people in the building wherever possible has been very helpful. And also for people to be able to inject this talkback. So as a producer, you really can see all the outputs of all the cameras which you are looking at from your home and inject onto the talkback if you want to. So it's just reducing the pressure in galleries and making the building work for us.
Yeah, well, that leads quite nicely onto the next question I had for you, which is how the requirements for social distancing and the kind of practicalities of this impact the business models of studios and coping with and providing more space for fewer productions. John? Oh, sorry, no, Andy, carry on.
Sorry. First of all, I'd say I'm not necessarily agreeing with the idea of fewer productions. So as I speak at the moment, all our studios are in action at Dock 10. And so we just need to find
that's great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is absolutely, I'm sure the others will say this too, there is absolutely a huge demand for studio content at the moment. One thing which was clear over lockdown is people were still hungry for content and seeing feel-good sort of game shows and that type of stuff, which we in this multi-camera studio facility business do. And there's absolutely an appetite for that. And so we're pretty full between now and Christmas, and there's a lot of work in the new year as well. So we're having to adapt as to how we deliver that work, making sure we only have the people which really need to be on site working on those productions, and then making sure the production teams are spread out. We've also done an analysis of all our rooms to see what the maximum number of people we can have in them. And like we've already mentioned, using perspex screens, using maximum ventilation to make sure we can operate in a safe manner.
And John, I saw you were keen to jump on there.
Yeah, we a very similar experience to Andy, actually. There's been a huge uptick in work in the autumn. So a lot of work's been pushed back, and the difficulty has really been scheduling it in. And, we've spread out from our existing footprint. We've taken an additional stage off the Roger to do It Takes Two, the sister show of Strictly. And we're also we're doing Little Mix, The Search at the Old Fountain Studios. So we've been very busy. We've also had audiences back. So we've had audiences back since August. So there's been a whole load of protocols around bringing them back in. So from a business model, we're in kind of recovery mode from the summer, really, is where we're at.
Yeah. Shall I go to Cara?
Yeah, I think very similarly to Andy and John, I think the perception is that, we've all been quiet and dead for the previous 6 months, and I'm very glad to say we've not been, and I think it's half the issue is scheduling it and making sure we're able to deliver and stay compliant, which is obviously a challenge. But we've had no decrease in the demand. It's probably only increased. And we, again, all of our stages are busy currently, all of our mixed stages are working. So it's been incredibly busy. I think the challenge just comes from the operation of logistically how you make it work and zoning the site. As I said, single entry and exit points, sanitized stations, perspex screens, similarly to Andy and John. The practicalities of that, but we've done a really good job of it, and I'm really proud of the team here. But yeah, the demand has certainly not decreased, and I can only see it going up with the demand for content, because I'm sure, just like everyone else, pretty much the contents of Amazon and Netflix has been watched. So the demand for more content is huge right now.
Yeah, we have actually sort of had no drop in inquiries. I would say we get about 3 or 4 inquiries a day for stage space, which we don't currently have because all the stages are busy. The look ahead is very, very good. As I say, we do long-term bookings with clients, so we don't have that supermarket type requirement that you're always looking for bookings to fill the odd bit of space, because we've already if you like, pinhold them very early on. The other thing, of course, is audience-wise, it's handled by our clients. I mean, they have come back to us. They do risk assessments, which we look at, and we get advice from our health and safety people. We do everything by using professional advice. We have zoning. So if an area does have a problem, we luckily, touch wood, have not had any problems so far, that they can be isolated and dealt with accordingly. We've noted, and remember, they're not our audiences, they're our clients' audiences, that the audiences have dropped. Pre-COVID, we've probably seen something like 3,900 people in audience numbers. This is not currently down to 872. So it's quite a significant drop in the number of people to allow for social distancing. The other thing is we try to ensure that the production companies are doing it correctly, and we're quite firm about the regulations on site. But they do all adhere. I mean, the great thing is they do all adhere. We've had temperature checks done on all my staff. We've had, when I say temperature checks, I mean the COVID tests done on all my staff. Very uncomfortable test, by the way, and Joanne's water. And they've all tested negative. A number of clients have taken up the offer as well on site. Yeah. We're also looking at a device which we're waiting for it to be well proven. That means that people can come on site and actually sort of have a test which takes only 20 minutes. The same one they're looking at the airports and things like that. So we're looking at that, which we hope will help. Yeah. We've also got these wonderful temperature machines that we got with the BBC, which are ones that you don't necessarily have to point the gun at the person's head. You just stand a couple of feet away and it automatically registers your temperature. So we've got a couple of those as well.
That's great. Well, no, I'm really thrilled to hear that you all are so booked at the moment. It's really good to hear. And I definitely, from a commissioning perspective, have heard a lot of people saying that they really just want that joyful entertainment programming because it acts as a level of escape for people not having to kind of stare at some bleak news all the time. But I think this leads on to the next question that I had, which was how you guys have been handling audiences.
Can I mention, Heather? Can I mention something?
Yeah.
I have so much confidence in the industry that today I have been showing around 25 people who are builders and designers and engineers for the 2 new big stages we're building at the studios. So that's all going ahead. That's all happening now. And so that will be built at these studios. So we are very confident in the industry and where it can go.
Yeah, that's great.
On the subject of audiences, Heather, obviously what we've done is space plan the audience rosters. So in what Roger's saying in terms of the overall numbers, they obviously are a lot less. So if you take something like TC1, so an audience capacity of about 550, by the time you've made it COVID safe so people can sit apart and get in and out without being close, it's less than 100 people. And the whole process of people being checked by the ticketing agency, all that track and trace records being kept, then being shepherded in safely. I mean, the loading of audiences, they're a lot reduced, but it is a timely process just to preserve all these protocols. And again, their temperatures are checked, the security type measures are put in place. They're actually queued up in these what we'd call bubbles outside the studio before they came in and brought in within those groups. So everyone has to wear a face covering, as does everyone on the studio floor. So it's a very controlled environment, but people have been amazingly pleased about being able to come back out again and watch some entertainment. So it's gone down well.
Yeah, I understand that you were one of the first studios to bring back an audience with the QI recording.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, so we did that in August. So, it's the recording of QI. And then, with well-placed microphones over the audience, the actual audience reaction is really good because performing on the stage, that's kind of what they need, is that kind of feedback. And that's works really well. People were very tolerant of the new restrictions. In a lot of ways, it gave them confidence to be coming back out into a controlled environment.
Absolutely.
We were only allowed to bring back audiences from the middle of September. We're obviously a bit delayed up here in the north because of our local lockdown. But that's obviously where we were delighted to be able to start doing that again. And one of the things which we are now doing, and we've got a number of particularly comedy shows are obviously hit by this, is looking to use additional studio space for an audience. So you can get instant reaction, so the artist and the talent can hear that audience. They will have some in the studio with them too, but in a studio, an adjacent studio, the audience can see the pictures out of that studio, can hear the artist, and what's importantly for the talents, they can hear the reaction of that audience. Because when it comes to timing comedy material and a sense of occasion when you're delivering comedy, that's really important. So that's something which we're planning to do in the very near future.
Great. Roger?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things about the audience side is also the audience handling before they actually go into the studio. As we're coming up for winter, we won't necessarily be able to put them in a big enough area. But luckily, we've got a couple of marquees, haven't we, John? That they will be going into well-ventilated marquees, so we can actually keep them dry and warm before they actually go into the studio, which is equally important.
Great. And Cara, I don't know if you had anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think it's similar to what I said before, really, and it's just our protocols and also being very clear all around the site of in what areas how many people are allowed to be. What we don't want is any confusion, so we've been very clear about our signage, painting on walkways, zoning the site, and making it very clear for people so there's no ambiguity, and also so there's no sort of disagreements or confusion. But we've had absolutely no issues, actually. I think putting those strict protocols in place very early on has been, and communicating those and making sure we stay consistently across that has enabled us to pretty much operate as normal with a few restrictions.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. I've got one final question because I'm conscious that we've had a few questions come through from our audience. So the final question I have for you guys is, will tech-driven innovations such as virtual studio environments and the teleporting of guests into studios offer a new potential revenue stream over the coming year?
Would you want to?
John. Oh no, Andy. Sorry.
Sorry, John. Didn't mean to interrupt. What I would say, one of the things we've been doing a huge amount of is remote production for BBC Sport and other sport clients. Because there's that realization that you don't need to send a team to the other side of the world or the other end of the country, but you can actually keep all those people based, within a few miles of Media City, and that can become a hub for sport production. So already this year we've done the FA Cup, semi-finals, the Challenge Cup. We're looking forward to doing the Six Nations later in the year. So we're doing a lot more remote sport. So I suspect that's something which we will see a lot more of going into the future.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, already the shows that are back, Graham Norton, Jonathan Ross, first show tonight, will have artists and performers who can't get to the UK, so they're on a screen within the studio environment. Whether there's a future in literally virtual type arrangements, most of the drive in our world has been a desire to get physically back together, to have the guests in the same place, to have the audience there. But I'm sure this technology will have a place in the future.
Yeah, it's nothing new. It's nothing new. We've always had satellite links if we wanted somebody in California to bring into our show. I think you're right. I think it'd be a mixture of both. I think the convenience of the technology is great, but at the same time, you do lose something in the delivery. And I think that people will endeavor to use both. I think we just have to embrace it as a studio setup. We have to improve it. I think the idea of actually increasing our broadband capability is very, very important. I mean, we have a very large broadband pipe coming into us, and I know John does. I presume you do as well, Andy and Cara. But it is very, very important to have a lot of bandwidth into each studio facility.
Yeah, I think we're probably slightly different from the live aspect. A lot of single camera, high-end TV dramas and independents and features here. But I think we had started before, the COVID crisis, which has enabled us to utilise smaller spaces by creating virtual productions. So, something that wouldn't ordinarily be able to be done. Location work, LED walls, virtual production meant that we could utilise smaller stages, meant shooting is an option for productions that weren't able to go out on location or weren't able to shoot in bigger spaces, and it meant we've made better use of our space, and we've actually seen a huge increase in our inquiries since we started that regarding virtual production, especially for the high-end TV dramas and features.
Great. Well, that's fantastic, and hopefully a little glimpse of the future. So I've got some questions that have been sent through. The first one I can see is from Adam, and it says, with the growing reliance of remote working, what solutions have you found for teams and crew members that have poor connectivity at home? John?
As we kind of mentioned earlier, and Andy mentioned that we have had production people remotely being able to use comm systems. So they're literally feeding back, looking at studio output, being able to feed back. Certainly our things like editing, we're editing remotely, and other functions, some of which are remote to the, as Andy sort of indicated, to create room in the gallery, but maybe on the site. But we've achieved both. So there's quite a lot of work being done in that area, and one of interest for the future really as to whether people adopt some ways of working through this that they retain in the future.
I think one of the problems you've got is that they're very badly supported in the UK. Our broadband connectivity is pathetic, to be honest with you. And if there was any initiative that this government could take, would be to improve the broadband connectivity, especially if you're out in the country. This idea of people remotely working from home is all very well, providing you've got the connectivity.
There is obviously a minimum connectivity standard which is required for anyone to be remote working. It's relatively low. It's amazing how much you can squeeze down what is a relatively small pipe, but you do need to have a half decent broadband to be able to take advantage of remote working.
Yeah, I think we've seen certainly people utilising a lot more of 4G and 5G rather than their home broadband providers. But we've tried to support our productions as much as possible, and obviously on site we have huge connectivity here, so we've tried to support the productions in that way.
The other thing I do is kick my kids off the PlayStation, because boy does that eat up a lot of the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Yeah. That and YouTube videos. So I've got a question here for Roger, which is, what effect has the lockdown and pandemic had on the companies based at Elstree, and have any of them suffered beyond recovery?
Well, that's hard to tell if they've suffered beyond recovery at the moment. They've all actually, they're all signed up to carry on. We've got a production village of over 40 people based on the site permanently. And whilst they may not be attending their offices continually, a lot of their activities are, I don't call them offices, I call them workspaces, because a lot of our creative clients are not necessarily office bound. They are creative space bound, so they may be model makers, designers, etc. And they do need to be on site, and they collaborate with each other. So hopefully there has been some support via some rent holidays. We've given some support via local council initiatives to give them grants. We hope that they will survive. We're trying to be as flexible as possible. At present, they all seem to be surviving, even if I would say at the moment only probably 25% of the offices and workspaces are actually occupied at any one time, but they do all ultimately come in.
Great. And then another question that I have for you guys is, with the risk of crew and talent having to isolate at any given time, what contingency plans do you have in place in case for when this happens? That's a good question there.
Do you want me to talk about that, Heather? We have protocols in place in terms of, because we've had lots of scares where people at home. So it's been unpicking that so people know what to do in instances. So we've created these checklists that people can go through. So my child is ill, appears to have COVID symptoms. What should I do? And also identify what consists of close contact. So in that situation, what action would you take? And that includes people removing from site, but obviously then cleaning protocols that would happen behind it. Now, obviously, the contingency in terms of replacing people, obviously, most difficult would be on-screen talent, and the productions themselves tend to manage that whole process, which is obviously a critical one for them.
It really brings home the importance of making sure that we all follow the guidelines really around the 2 meters plus and using the screens, because if a member of the team does come down with COVID, they are the protection layer which is going to stop it from spreading. Because quite easily, otherwise track and trace, if we weren't follow those guidelines, could take a production off air. So it's about making sure we follow those guidelines, regular sort of cleaning throughout the facility, and also trying to keep people within certain bubbles. So we've got certain teams, certain members of the Doc 10 team and production and freelancers working on certain shows. We're trying to reduce wherever we can, is that always possible, the amount of cross-contamination of different groups of people, to reducing and mitigating that risk.
Do you want me to speak? Shall I speak?
Yes, please.
We operate this thing which is called workplace settings, which is
very nice.
What we do is the Hertfordshire Borough Council. So there is a whole procedure to go through with Public Health England, reporting structures, etc. So you have to adhere to this. And I think we work to this. All our clients have a copy of this. We recently had a client on site who had one of his freelancers test positive, but hadn't been working on site, but it was remote. So he had his whole team isolated for 2 weeks. So he came and fulfilled the requirements of this working directive.
Yeah, I think similarly to that, we've got a digital version, as I said, our app and our declaration, which every single person, you have to go through every day. Have you come in contact with anybody? All those kind of things, and a bit like a document, a flowchart that you can follow about what you do. Only if you comply with every single regulation are you allowed on site, and that has enabled a huge amount of control for our site. I actually hadn't managed to submit mine yesterday morning, and the security guard wouldn't let me, so I had to sit at the front of the queue in my car and complete it in the car. So it was submitted before I was allowed access, and that's quite right. That's what we should be doing for every single person on site. And I think, as Andy said, it is adherence to our own protocols, because if we don't, it will only affect all of us and our industry even more than it has already.
Great. Well, I think that was a really informative and really helpful panel, guys. So I'd like to thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our audience for sending in some really interesting questions. So bye, everyone.
Hey, yeah, cheers, Aaron. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Welcome to the last session of the day, Producing in Lockdown. I'm sorry that we are a little bit delayed. We are just missing Richard Frediani, who is editor at BBC Breakfast, but he's going to pop on when he can. But I'm Alice, and with me today we have Chris Jones, who is head of branded content at Electric Robin, Jan Younghusband, who is head of music commissioning at the BBC, and Erin Gordon, who is series director for Good Morning Britain and Peston on ITV. And just a reminder to everyone, so please submit your questions to the panel in the chat box, and we're looking forward to getting to them at the end of the session. So, hi everyone, lovely to have you all here.
Hello.
Hello.
And so if we just rewind back to the beginning of lockdown, you all must have experienced, 23rd of March, the sudden change where workflows transitioned to remote working almost overnight. And if I begin with Chris, how did this impact the completion of the projects you had going on and your ability to continue production at Electric Robin?
Yeah, wow. It was a while ago, right? So
feels like a lifetime.
It was a weird one because we were quite set up to work remotely anyway. We're a company that doesn't quite know if we're going to be working, on another continent in a couple of weeks' time or somewhere where we're going to have limited signal. So our unit and our guys kind of tend to be quite self-sufficient in this, in the fact that everything is on separate drives. They've got mobile edit units. So one of our gigs we did out in Antarctica. So we managed to get footage back from there. We thought, right, we might be all right with lockdown. But it affected projects in the sense that, there was a couple of big ones going on. So simple things that you don't normally have to think about that suddenly become an issue, like big projects being on drives. A couple of weeks before we were thinking, right, so we need to duplicate all of that. We need to figure out a system whereby we know we're working off the most up-to-date projects. Things like that. Where are we going to have all of our kit? We tend to own our own kit. So suddenly it had gone from a centralized space into, people's living rooms and hallways, and all our partners were really over the moon about that as well, as you could imagine. So all those different things, and then just kind of like the comfort of having a centralized office space where you could speak to people, where you could look at a whiteboard. All of a sudden, those things you take for granted in the middle of a big project, you suddenly think, right, how do we do this then? How do we do this over Zoom, and how do we communicate? So in some respects, we were set up quite well because of the nature of what we do. In other respects, we found the same issues that lots of other people did.
And Jan, I presume there was also some programming at the BBC that you were maybe in the process of making, which was also impacted?
Well, yes. I mean, it was obviously after the initial shock. The gratifying thing was actually how the production houses responded, saying, okay, we can make this work, because obviously we have technology. And I think I want to say actually thank you to everybody who's made programs for us during this time, because it's been very difficult, but actually we quickly realized that we just had to do things differently. And I think the initial response, the first thing we did was make a film with the choir Tenebrae for Easter, because there was this thing of everybody wanting to escape and have fun, but actually, it was announced that weekend that the first sort of 10,000 people had died. And so we did a sort of meditative piece for the Sunday night. And the first piece was filming a 20-piece choir on their mobile phones at home and post-producing it to sound as if they were singing together in a cathedral. And it was the most extraordinary thing. Then we did the Global Sits, which was very much the artists, raising money for the World Health Organization, which raised about 130 million for the World Health Organization. And that was the rock world responding, as they do in these times. And there were lots of performances from their kitchens. saw lots of rock stars' kitchens. And then after that, we thought, well, hang on. Suddenly there were regulations how to shoot safely. So the next step was to then understand how to work safely by rigging a house when somebody's out for a walk, cleaning it, going outside. They came back, and then filming them and speaking to them remotely. So we then filmed the Canny Mason family at home, and they, we were speaking to them from the street. or from a laptop. Alan Yentob presented from his house by speaking to them. So actually, we've been saved by technology. Then, as things progressed, we understood that we could do the proms, of course, there was strict government regulations. So, I mean, I think it's been a growing thing, and now I think we have to face that we can't go back, but where we are is normality. So actually, in a way, it's been, later with Jules Holland is doing really well. All our stuff is doing very well with the audience. So even though it's been made in a different way, like Glastonbury is different, proms are different, later with Jules Holland is different. All credit to the production industry for just standing up, after the shock and going, right, we're going to get this to happen. And it is, we are going to do stuff. Strictly's live this weekend. It's fantastic, really.
Brilliant. And Aaron, you had to keep the news on TV, which was obviously a big task as soon as lockdown happened. And what was kind of the overall impact? How did you kind of make adaptations to ensure that you could keep broadcasting throughout such a tricky and hard time?
I think, working in news, we're all sort of built in a certain way that you're sort of ready to go in a major sort of disaster or big breaking news event or something like that. So we sort of, I guess, treated it like that to start with, which was, okay, this is all going to be very different, but we just need to get on with it. The biggest change to our program, Good Morning Britain, was that we weren't allowed any guests in the studio. So, we're used to having lots of outside sources and correspondents all around the world, but we're also used to having, loads of people in our studio, talking to our presenters, but we can't do that. We still have a 3-hour show to fill. So I think using technology like Live View and Zoom and FaceTime and things like that, we were able to get guests on the show, our regular contributors, and, whether it's sort of politicians or whatever, we still managed to get them on, but we wouldn't have been able to have done that without, the sort of platforms like Zoom and FaceTime and LiveView.
And I know, Chris, you produced the YouTube original Stream With Me, which brought together some celebrities and YouTube creators to raise money for the NHS. How was that film? What adaptations did you make to accommodate lockdown conditions, and how did technology help with this?
Yeah, it's interesting just hearing what Erin said about live view and kind of conditions in studio as well. So for those of you who don't know what Stream With Me was, it were YouTube originals, who, by the way, have been brilliant throughout all of this with us. And kind of supporting productions as well, came to us and said, right, we want to get as many YouTubers in the UK, big creators, together as possible. It's an initiative that will raise money for the NHS. Obviously, YouTubers are left, right and centre. So how can we make this happen, and how can we make it fun? How can we make it last 4 hours, and what are they going to be doing, essentially? So we had to figure out how we were going to get sort of camera units and live link ups from somewhere as far as, somewhere as far as Brighton, up as far as Scotland. And it consisted of taking small teams all over the country, acting in a very, very COVID safe manner, full sterilised equipment, going in with full PPE equipment. And then we had to get them centralised via MCR. We work with a company called 3 Screens to do that. So that was a case of being able to speak to them, working off a gallery app, because there was a live gallery going on as well, called Unity, which when I first opened it looked very, very daunting, and actually it was quite intuitive within about the first 5 minutes. So speaking to someone over gallery in Brighton, making sure that they could hear what the next event was coming up. If you imagine something like Comic Relief, where you've got constant, or Children in Need, where you've got constant items, that it's much, much easier when you've got broadcast trucks and you've got a centralised gallery space in the studio. We didn't have any of that, other than the gallery space that was more or less fit for purpose with this. So yes, that's how we did that. Just lots of planning, and on top of that, having a creative team at home who were all working in their silos. So all of the creative meetings that went into that, were all being done outside of a room, which is where you would typically do it. So yeah.
And Jan, obviously you had the proms, which was such a big thing. There was a lot of debate. Will it happen? Won't it happen? So kind of what adaptations were made to the proms? Obviously a lot. And what tech did you use to pull off the eventual success of it?
Well, obviously we couldn't do the entire 8 weeks of live concerts because we couldn't have an audience in the hall, and so it wasn't economically viable, if you like. So David Pickard, who's the director of the proms, decided we would do 2 weeks at the end. So it ended on the same last night that was expected. And then the thought was, how can we deliver an 8-week experience? So, and of course, we have the most fantastic archive. And we knew immediately that the thing we couldn't make was the really big stuff. So the archive weeks into the last 2 weeks, we concentrated on television on delivering huge success and very successful concerts from the past that concerts of a scale that we knew from government regulations that we couldn't do. And then we had to work out how to sit the instruments, because the big problem of spittle, because a trumpet player cannot blast down the back of the neck of the oboe player or whatever. And so then there was the logistics of how many players we could have in the hall and how they could sit and where they could be, and therefore what music could be performed. Because it's fine if it's a Mozart symphony, it's not a big orchestra, but you've got Rachmaninoff, it's a different matter. So the program kind of worked out by the creative people to the resources we had. And then actually the big issue was, how do you give it a sense of occasion when there's no audience in the hall? And Live Wire Pictures, who made the proms for us, and David Bishop, they came up with this brilliant solution to light the auditorium. So there was a kind of feeling that there was somebody there, even when there wasn't. So I think what we saw with the proms was just such a brilliant demonstration of the genius of craft we have. And obviously being safe was the primary thing. I mean, I went to the proms, but I was there, but I was in door 12 and I wasn't allowed, I was put in a chair and I wasn't allowed to move out of it. I wasn't allowed backstage so safety for everyone is the primary focus. But I think the good thing is that the more we try to do, and producers don't have to, you try to do it, don't worry, we are learning how to do it, we'll help you. The more we've tried to do, the more we've learned how to do it. But obviously everything is so regulated, we have to work to the regulations, but the proms look beautiful. They look like a proper piece of television, and we didn't have to shoot them in anyone's kitchen. So we were able to do that. But we cannot underestimate what a terrible time it is for live music across the world. It's a disastrous time. So we feel at the BBC we're committed to try and make live music happen, whether it's later with Jules Holland. We're doing what we can do. We're hoping that by learning skills and using all the technology we have, that we can find ways to do more as we go on.
Lovely. And now moving on to kind of a more general question, but perhaps Aaron, you'd like to start. Did any of you successfully launch any new ways of filming during lockdown that wasn't based on Zoom or web chats? Did you pioneer maybe anything exciting?
Yeah, I think, for us, one of the key things about a breakfast show is that sort of the warmth and the sort of the relationship between our presenters. And one of the things that we sort of brought in quite recently, actually, not sort of immediately, we were doing a sort of different format, is we sort of introduced this split screen, which makes it look like Piers and Susanna are sat together. When in fact, obviously they're socially distanced, they're 2 meters apart. So we, whereas in the past we'd shoot them on one camera on a 2-shot, we've now got 2 cameras on mid shots, and then the Vision Mixer splices them together with a sort of soft edge wipe in the middle, and it looks like they're sat together. So, that's something that we've just sort of had to do because we were sort of, we were missing that sort of 2-shot, which is quite an iconic shot on our program. So that's definitely something that we've had to do on Good Morning Britain. I mean, in terms of Peston and things like that, it's quite sort of straightforward because Robert's on his own and things like that. But in terms of shooting and spacing people out in the studio, we've really had to, I've had to sort of think about how we're shooting people and where we're putting people so that the crew are socially distanced as well from the presenters. So that, you know, if we're doing a camera move or something like that, which is something I was keen to continue to do, we need to make sure that they're socially distanced from the presenters, you know, on their shots.
And how about you, Chris? Was there any new technologies you managed to utilise? Oh, Chris, you're on mute. Yeah, you're back now.
Yeah, I'd say it's more kind of techniques rather than actually pioneering anything. I mean, Jan, you mentioned about the lack of audience and what that does to a show and what that does to production. A case in point with us was two, actually. The first one, we helped take Have I Got News for You out of the studio. And, you know, this is a show that's been going for 29 years in the same format, pretty much with the same contributors. And then all of a sudden, the contributors were being filmed from their home, you know, and just think about that for a minute. You know, a show that's been in studio for all that time, you take away the studio, you take away the audience, which is critical to live comedy, and kind of the response that the performers have, being able to see each other, knowing each other's nuances. Suddenly, producers and presenters and talent were having to have a slight eye on engineering, things that we'd never not. Well, I would shy away from completely. So, you know, Ian Hislop in his house talking to an operator about moving a monitor and things like this, there would be split-second delays. So what we tried to do with that was, again, it was using LiveView, is just kind of reduce the latency as much as possible so that they could hear each other and react, you know, and first off, we got it on air. It wasn't ready, but we got it on air, and then it got refined as we went along. The second one, I think, was Comedy Central at the Edinburgh Fringe. You know, Edinburgh Fringe was cancelled this year, more or less. So suddenly there's lots and lots of comedians who had been spending ages refining their Edinburgh shows, who then couldn't go up, you know, and they haven't been working. They've been trying to do gigs to remote audiences. But that's hard as well. There's no live audience that they can bounce off. You know, they in most cases they can't see or hear the audience. Essentially, they're delivering a monologue. So Comedy Central said, "Can we want to give a platform to some of these artists that have been going up this year? Can we get a live audience without being in the room, but as close to the experience as possible?" Now, anyone that's been to a live comedy gig will know just exactly what that audience brings, you know, aside from the verbal abuse that you would got. And we had a little bit of that as well. So we were going to audiences in their lounges, setting up, you know, strong internet connections so that the stand-up could hear them, respond to them, see them, and that there was a split-second delay of latency. So again, it was process that we refined as opposed to pioneer. You can never really fully recreate that experience, but the aim was to get as close there as possible.
Lovely. And we've been joined by Richard as Zoe Barber, but he's here. Hi, Richard. How are you?
Alice, how are you?
Hi. Good.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to ask you, Richard, as I've asked everyone else on the panel. Obviously, you had the job of keeping the news on on television. How did you make sure that BBC News kept broadcasting, and what adaptations did you make and technology did you use? Hello? Oh, Richard, I think your internet might have gone, or there's a bit of a lag.
I'm no technical guru. I heard some of what Erin said, and
I think we can just about hear you. Let's try again. No, Richard, you're frozen. Oh no. I think we've lost him again, unfortunately. So everyone else, I would like to know what are some of the best examples of lockdown created productions that you came across, like other people's that you admired. Who did you think did a really good job during lockdown? Maybe Jan, if you wanted to start.
Gosh, I'm just trying to think. Well, I mean, I think what's been wonderful is the way the industry's pulled together and the fact that everybody's trying to make stuff, whether, and not just on the BBC, but, on my fellow broadcasters and YouTube and I don't know, I think it's been very, very inspiring to see, and also music, a lot of the professional companies, streaming their own work. I mean, I think that's been the most powerful thing. And I think in terms of what I feel is the most innovative is the fact that we've learned how to rig a house with remote cameras and operate those cameras from anything from sitting in a car in the street to being in another country, practically. So that, for me, is the biggest breakthrough. And I think the second breakthrough is the fact that when we shoot concerts, we're very restricted by the audience. And so the nice thing, in a way, about doing the proms without the audience was that we could put the cameras where we needed them to be. And so in a very difficult time, actually, it was even more beautifully shot than it normally would be. So I think, I don't know, I suppose it isn't a good time, but it's inspiring to see that we've got drama coming back on the telly this weekend. David Hare's new piece starting. Strictly's going to go live. So I think that whereas in the beginning it was about can we survive at all. Now I think it's very much brilliant that the news is happening, that all this is going on, and that and now actually we're no longer necessarily in our kitchen. We've understood to introduce high production values into something that's shot in the most particular way. So we're able to deliver a proper piece of television. So there's some credit to the production industry that they're not going to be beaten, which is very, very exciting, I think. And also I think I want to say that Later with Jules Holland is a fantastic show, even though it's completely compromised. It's almost like I think when we're in times of strife, I think very often this is very good for creativity. I hate to say that, but it makes us think. We've got to make this happen, and that's why our creative industry is so brilliant, because they're just full of ideas to make it work. Great.
And how about you, Aaron? What have you found to be inspiring?
I think, firstly, as Jan says, that it makes you feel quite proud, actually, that everyone in the industry sort of has sort of pulls together and has found a way of keeping their shows on air, whether that be the sort of stuff that I do, or or what the other guys here do, or things like soaps and things like that. Have I Got News for You is a perfect example of they didn't just give up and say, right, that's it, that's us done for 5 months. It's like, well, how can we get that show on air? Actually, it sounds sort of I mean, I'm going to say it, but my colleagues on ITV Daytime, there's 7.5 hours there that we've had to keep on air every day, and the way that the management, the senior team, the technology team have pulled together to keep those 3 shows on air, that's from 6 in the morning till 1:30 in the afternoon. It's pretty impressive that we managed to do that as a team and safely, and with less people, with people working from home. So I think, there's not one thing that specifically stands out, but, I just think it's pretty impressive that everyone's managed to keep going. And I just think that shows what a great industry we're in.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think this industry is a great example, even under non-COVID conditions, of a Dunkirk spirit. We're all used to kind of quick response and emergencies and everything else, and curveballs being thrown at us, let alone a pandemic. It's interesting because at the start, just going back to kind of Have I Got News for You, and it's kind of rough and ready look. Things moved on very, very quickly. Within about 2 months, and the Ranga Nation really impressed me as an example of lockdown content. It looks so slick. Yes, it was kind of Zoom elements as well, but if you just look at the art direction that went into the lounge, the way that they integrated new format points with the existing format, it worked really well. And I think, as you know, it's a competitive industry, that you know the barriers are raised very, very quickly. This period goes, and I'm sure that's the same in some respects with whether you're a commissioner, whether you're a brand. The other thing that I think has impressed me as well is the type of, you know, branded content, which is an area I tend to work more within, that is now not simply resorting to sentimental Zoom style adverts. We've all seen them, I think, and thinking, right, we've moved on from that. How can we try and recreate content or create content that acknowledges the situation we're in, but doesn't lean into it too heavily, you know, with Zoom and everything else, that more or less tries to take down the barriers, whereas behind the scenes, everybody is probably working in some respects twice as slow as possible to get things on air. You know, it takes twice as long to do anything now with social distancing, and with, like you said, I was surprised, I hadn't even thought about the brass instruments, Jan, as well, in terms of things like that suddenly you just think, oh God, yeah, of course, we've got to think about that. So getting that granular with it, but still coming up with something that is better than the last thing you did. And yeah, people have been doing amazing work, I think.
And obviously, you know, Chris, you spoke a lot about how, yeah, we started off with the rough and ready look and Zoom formats, and we're moving on. So I wondered how you all feel kind of production is going to get back on track again. Do you feel that hybrid workflows, so people working from home and sometimes working from the office, and social distancing now being kind of fairly established, enable productions to kind of access a similar range of production, studio, post-production, location, and get kind of where they were before the pandemic? Do you think we're established now in that? I don't know if you wanted to start, Jan.
Well, I think we're gradually being able to do things, but it's very, very different, because you can't just have a number of people you normally have in a studio, social distancing, how you get in. You know, when we did the proms, we had the orchestras in all the boxes all around in the auditorium. They all had their own box to change in, things like that. So, you know, it's partly finding solutions. It's also having creative ideas that can be made in the circumstances. But I also think we're quite dependent on things like testing, and, you know, they in the rock industry, they're talking about this new test that you buy your ticket and you turn up, you get tested, you have to go and wait over there, and then if you're all right, you can go in, and if you're not, you can't. But I mean, these are the kinds of ways they're going to try and get around it, because obviously, you know, there will be no live music. You know, their concerts are pretty much gone. You know, Rock World functioning, and probably won't until next May, and so they're not even thinking they can function till then. But I think so much depends on how the pandemic continues, and whether there's a vaccine, or whether there's any way of a more efficient way of testing. Obviously, you know, we're tested when we go in and out of things, you know, temperature and all that stuff. But, you know, a test that is a proper test will show that you do not have COVID, and therefore you can come in, which means people who are well and don't have it can be closer together, obviously. But I mean, these are all things that are, you know, high priority developments which will affect us in the future. But in the meantime, I think we should be very careful of this expression, when we get back to normal, people say to me, because where we are now is normal. This is normal. And this is a new normal. I hate that expression, but you know what I mean. And so I think instead of sitting down going, oh, we can't do it because we're going to wait till we get back to normal, we have to go, right, how can we progress? And then going back to the old point is, you know, we have technology, we have a very, very, very clever industry. And I think it's actually inspiring to see. And in terms of working, we're not in the office. None of us are in the office. I think it's difficult. We need to be social. We need to see each other. But then the other side of that, in the BBC, for instance, you know, you can never get a meeting room. You can never get anywhere to sit and talk. And actually, I think we've been more. I know, it's a practical problem. But like, you know, we have these Zoom meetings with everybody, and I think certainly in BBC News and across the BBC, I think we've never felt so joined up together, actually. So internally, it's made a huge difference and to how we get together, because you can just get together so much more easily. You don't have to travel up and around the country. You can be anywhere in the world and still get together. So if you stay on the positive, that's a good thing. But obviously, meeting up and talking and a glass of wine is also a very important thing.
I saw you two both nodding your head.
We're celebrating the broadcast awards.
Yeah, exactly.
So all credit to you for keeping it going, so we can feel together in it, which is very important.
And what are your thoughts on that, Chris?
You
think we should abandon the new normal? Get back to normal even?
There's so much great content that we can't do properly anymore. The big one is getting studio audiences in. I mean, that's a huge one. If you think about how many formats rely on that as well, and I'm delighted that Jules Holland is still on there. It's I think just kind of turning it around slightly. The differences that I've noticed with this kind of hybrid way of working is we're not all chained to our office desks. TV can be long hours, from especially in London if you've got that commute in and commute back, from kind of 9 till 9, 12-hour days. There's a bit more. That's not to say it doesn't get hectic. It does get hectic, and our respective partners have to put up with us when it's all going off. But the other thing is that the more of the production team, I think, are being exposed to the more granular elements of live production, especially through live view apps where you've got links and everything else. So, and they have to be more in tune with what's going on because it affects them in the edit. We can't all sit in the office and watch it together. So they're getting more exposure to the inner workings, I guess. So they're all getting engineering heads in some way, shape, or form, even if that is just clicking on a link or such like. So that's a positive. But yeah, I think there's gonna be some seismic changes before we get back to anything near normal. And you're right, this is the new normal.
Yeah.
Aaron, how about you?
I think there's lots of stuff that I miss personally about the old world, the old way of doing things. Mostly in the studio and just things like the Steadicam, things like that. But one of the really good things to come out of this, if you like, is the fact that if there's a story that breaks or there's something we want to do, we can achieve getting that on air immediately. We don't have to send a truck, we don't have to send a correspondent or a camera team. We can just use our news gathering skills to find the person that we want to talk to and then just get them on the phone on a FaceTime or a Skype, which is great. So something, when our presenters come in the morning and they've sort of seen something on Twitter or someone on Twitter they want to talk to, within an hour and a half, we can get that person on air. Whereas in the sort of old way of doing things, it would be the show tomorrow or, later in the week. So it sort of made us rethink how we make our program, I guess, so that's definitely a positive from it. But yeah, this is I hate the new normal as well, but this is very much it, isn't it? We've just got to get on with it.
And so we've had a couple of questions from the audience. So this question comes from Nick Kennelly, and he asked, what are the positives you have felt have come out of this? I'm reading this as I go, and we've just discussed some of the positives. He also says, is this a model that you can use for the future? I think we kind of have just discussed this. So, yep. This is the new normal. We've got another question as well from Paul Craig. And he says, with your guests and on-screen talent, did they have to be guided up the tech curve in order to allow their participation in your productions this year? Just a big yes.
Yeah, they did.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's challenging because things like, you have to do your own makeup or, there are certain things that you have to figure out or, I don't know. I mean, I think the presenters have been great because they've sort of, again, come in with a great spirit to make it work. But you know, I think there are a lot of practical things involved in being able, you know, presenting from home. But I think the other thing is that we have to remember the audience is at home, and we miss the audience in all our events, obviously, but actually the audience is at home, and that's really important that we address them directly. And so, you know, when you see Claudia Winkleman or whatever, you know, you feel that actually she's at home too, so she's in the same situation. So it's not like she's allowed out and you're not. And in fact, in the early days, when we did the Global Sits event around Easter, a couple of the audience said to me, "We're not allowed out. Why are they allowed in the studio?" So actually, the fact that we're all in the same boat is, I mean, the audience is stuck at home. We're stuck at home, you know, but it's still, you know, we're still doing it. So I think it's not. I mean, we want you not to look too rubbish sitting in your kitchen, obviously, but you know, so lighting it and making it look like it's professionally done is really important. And some of the stuff you see online is so awful, and we are professional people, so we have a responsibility to make a professional piece of work, like the news and everything that we do. But on the other hand, I think showing the world that we're in the same, you know, we are all together in it, and that's been rather wonderful. We're all brought together in the same, with the same, you know, in this moment. And I think that's been very profound, I think, for us all.
I think that's kind of a lovely closing statement to wrap this up with. TV has definitely brought us all together this year. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.